The November wind cut through Michael Reynolds' worn hunting jacket, his breath forming ghost-like clouds in the pre-dawn chill. He adjusted the strap of his Remington more out of habit than necessity. These Saturday hunts weren't about deer anymore. They were about breathing air that didn't smell like overdue notices and broken promises, about walking until the static in his chest loosened enough to face another week. His German Shepherd, Ranger, padded silently beside him, alert and steady. The dog's military training showed in his disciplined gait, a remnant from Michael's second tour in Afghanistan, where Ranger had served alongside him before they both returned home, broken in ways that didn't show on the surface. 2 hours into the forest, Michael knew he had strayed farther than usual. The familiar paths had given way to steeper terrain, the trees growing taller and more densely packed. The foreclosure notice pinned to his refrigerator back at the cabin had driven him deeper into the woods today. 3 more weeks, and this land wouldn't be his woods anymore. The thought hollowed out something inside him. When the ground leveled into an unexpected plateau, Ranger stopped short, ears pivoting forward. Michael followed his gaze and froze. Ahead, a clearing opened like a wound in the forest, and in the middle stood something that had no right to be there. A dome-shaped structure, half swallowed by moss and ivy, its geometric panels sagging under years of weather. The steel door hung crooked on rusted hinges, streaked with oxidation the color of dried blood. Michael's combat instincts kicked in. Approach slowly, check corners, identify exits. The structure was approximately 40 feet in diameter, made of prefabricated panels that might once have been white, but now matched the dull gray of November skies. He circled the perimeter, Ranger at his heels. Above, a rack of solar panels tilted southward. At first glance, they seemed like abandoned technology, the kind that died after a few harsh winters. But as Michael shifted his stance, sunlight caught one at an angle, revealing a clean spot where snow and debris had been recently cleared away. The sound reached him next, a faint mechanical hum, barely audible. Michael tracked it to a vent near the foundation where a fan turned slowly, deliberately, as if conserving energy while completing its programmed task. He pressed his palm against the dome's outer wall. The material was cool, but not with the brittle cold of true abandonment. A vibration hummed beneath his fingers, almost imperceptible, like a sleeping heartbeat. A cigarette butt caught his eye, partially hidden in the fallen leaves near the door. Michael picked it up, examining the filter. The paper hadn't yellowed. The cut end wasn't frayed by weather. Someone had been here within the last day or two. The footprints confirmed it, subtle depressions in the soft earth around the perimeter, deliberately placed to avoid leaving obvious tracks. The back of Michael's neck tingled with the same alertness he'd felt in Kandahar when entering unfamiliar buildings. This wasn't simply a ruin reclaimed by forest. This was something maintained, watched, protected. His eyes mapped exit routes automatically, calculating sight lines and cover positions. Ranger growled softly, nose twitching at unseen currents. Michael pulled his phone from his pocket, snapping a series of photos. The panels, the fan, the door, the footprints. His finger hovered over the screen. No signal. Of course. Before leaving, he took his pocket knife and carved a small, inconspicuous mark into a nearby tree, a triangle with a line through it, an old unit signal for observed but not engaged. The marking would be invisible to casual observers but clear to him upon return. If someone removed it, he'd know the site was being monitored. The municipal office sat between the library and a shuttered diner on Ravenwood's Main Street, its flag hanging limp in the windless afternoon. Inside, the scent of floor polish and old paper filled the stale air. The clerk, Martha Collins, looked up when Michael approached, her smile professional but empty. Michael set his phone on the counter, swiping to the dome photographs. The change in Martha's expression was subtle but unmistakable, a tightening around the eyes, a slight pallor beneath her makeup. Her fingers, which had been tapping a pen against a notepad, went still. Martha flipped through property maps dating back decades, her finger tracing borders with practiced efficiency. According to every official record in Ravenwood, there was no dome structure within 20 miles of town limits. No permits, no easements, no tax records. The banker's comment from last week's town council meeting echoed in Michael's head. Some people just aren't cut out for financial responsibility. Perhaps the Veterans Support Programs could help Mr. Reynolds with his situation. Gerald Matthews' voice had carried just enough volume to ensure everyone heard, just enough sympathy to disguise the mockery. The foreclosure on Michael's cabin wasn't just business for Matthews, it was entertainment. Clyde Johnson's general store stood at the edge of town, its weathered siding and hand-painted sign a throwback to another era. The old man behind the counter had hands gnarled from 60 years of hard work, skin tanned to leather by decades of sun. When Michael mentioned hunting deeper in the northern woods, Clyde's eyes sharpened with interest. When he described the dome structure, those same eyes flicked to the door, checking for listeners. Clyde lowered his voice, leaning across the counter as if the shelves themselves might be eavesdropping. 5 years back, a reporter fellow from the city came asking about strange buildings in those woods. Started poking into town business, old bank dealings. Went camping out there and never came back. Search party found his gear. Nothing else. Sheriff called it exposure, wild animal attack. Maybe so, but some say that place takes what it wants. The wind had picked up by the time Michael left the store, driving the season's first snowflakes in horizontal streaks. The storm matched his mood, darkening, turbulent, laden with warning. Ranger sat alert in the passenger seat of Michael's aging pickup, eyes fixed on his master's face as if reading the tension there. The cabin looked smaller somehow when Michael pulled into the gravel drive, its log walls and metal roof insufficient against the gathering storm, both outside and within him. The foreclosure notice had arrived 3 weeks ago, final payment due December 1st. His construction business had collapsed with the economy, contracts dried up, savings depleted by medical bills after his last tour. The mountains of paperwork from the VA remained unanswered, benefits delayed by bureaucratic indifference. Sarah's weekend visit loomed tomorrow. How could he explain to his 15-year-old daughter that the place she'd called home since she was born would belong to the bank in 3 weeks? The divorce 2 years ago had already fractured her world. Jessica had taken the house in town, the stability, the future. Michael had gotten the cabin, the debts, and every other weekend with a daughter growing increasingly distant. The hunting trip and strange discovery had driven these thoughts away for a few hours. Now they returned with reinforcements. Inside, Michael built a fire in the wood stove, the familiar routine of splitting kindling and arranging logs offering temporary focus. Ranger settled on the worn rug nearby, eyes never leaving his master. The dog had saved Michael's life twice in Afghanistan, sensing IEDs the detection equipment had missed. Now he served a different purpose, keeping the nightmares at bay, providing wordless understanding when the memories surfaced. That night, Michael dreamed of the dome, its curved surface glowing from within, pulsing like a heart. In the dream, the door swung open to reveal a spiral staircase descending into darkness. Sarah stood at the threshold, looking back at him with accusing eyes before stepping inside. When he tried to follow, the door slammed shut, and the entire structure began to rotate, boring into the earth like a drill bit, taking his daughter with it. He woke sweating despite the cabin's chill, Ranger's muzzle pressed against his hand. Sarah arrived the next morning in Jessica's SUV, the contrast between vehicles as stark as the difference between his ex-wife's new life and his own. Jessica didn't get out, just waved briefly through the window before backing down the drive, her new husband barely visible in the passenger seat. Sarah had grown taller since summer, her face losing the last traces of childhood. She wore her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her eyes the same deep brown as Michael's, guarded and observant. The distance between them had been growing for months, stretched by the separate lives they now led, by the things Michael couldn't bring himself to say. The cabin's roof had developed a leak above the kitchen, water dripping steadily into a cooking pot during the night's storm. Michael climbed onto a ladder, Sarah handing up tools as he replaced damaged shingles. Working with his hands settled something in him, the familiar motions of measuring, cutting, securing, creating an island of competence in a sea of failure. Sarah remained quiet, responding to his questions about school with minimal details. The silence between them grew heavier as the afternoon wore on. Michael caught her looking at the foreclosure notice he'd failed to hide. But she said nothing, just turned away with the resigned expression of someone accustomed to disappointment. While Michael was storing tools in the shed, Sarah picked up his phone to check the weather forecast. The dome photos were still open in his gallery. When he returned, she held the phone toward him, eyes wide with the first genuine interest he'd seen from her in months. What is this place? Michael hesitated, protective instincts warring with the hunger for connection. The mystery of the dome had awakened something in him, purpose, focus, distraction from his crumbling life. Now he saw the same spark in Sarah's eyes. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table, heads bent over printouts of the photos. Sarah's knowledge surprised him. A school project on experimental, sustainable housing had given her insight into the dome's possible origins. The structure's design suggested late 1980s or early 90s architecture, an era when earth-sheltered and solar-passive buildings had briefly captured architectural imagination. But why here, unmarked on any map, unmentioned in town records? Why maintained but abandoned? Why the fresh footprints, the cleared solar panels? The questions created a bridge between them, the first real conversation they'd shared in months. When Sarah asked to see the dome in person, Michael's instinct was refusal. The structure felt wrong somehow, its existence a deliberate secret. But the eagerness in Sarah's voice, the animated way she gestured as she spoke about potential explanations, these were too precious to dismiss. He found himself nodding, setting conditions. They'd go together, stay alert, bring Ranger, and leave at the first sign of trouble. The forest seemed different with Sarah beside him, her presence heightening Michael's awareness of potential dangers. Every shadow held new significance. Every unexpected sound caused him to step slightly in front of his daughter. Ranger led the way, his behavior more focused than during recreational hikes, as if he sensed the purpose in their journey. Sarah peppered Michael with questions about tracking, forest navigation, identifying edible plants, subjects that momentarily transformed him from failing father to knowledgeable guide. He found himself sharing skills learned during military survival training, knowledge he'd never thought relevant to his daughter's world of smartphones and school dances. The dome looked exactly as it had 2 days before, its weathered surface impassive in the filtered sunlight. Sarah stopped at the edge of the clearing, her intake of breath audible. It looks like something from another planet, or a science experiment someone abandoned. Michael watched her examine the structure with methodical curiosity, circling it clockwise while he went counterclockwise, maintaining sightlines out of protective habit. Ranger investigated the perimeter, nose to ground, behavior unchanged from the previous visit. The solar panels still hummed with quiet energy, the ventilation fan turning at the same measured pace. Michael pointed out the signs of maintenance, the footprints now partially erased by yesterday's rain, but still faintly visible to trained eyes. Sarah listened with growing excitement, her analytical mind connecting dots, forming theories, asking questions he hadn't considered. She ran her hand along the curved wall, fingers tracing the seams between panels. The construction was more sophisticated than it appeared at first glance. Precision engineering beneath the cosmetic weathering. Near the door, Sarah found what Michael had missed, a recessed panel hidden beneath a strip of decorative molding, its surface disguised to match the dome's exterior. Before Michael could stop her, Sarah pressed what looked like a small button within the recess. The ground beneath them shuddered with a low mechanical groan. Michael grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her back as the entire structure rotated slowly on its base. The movement was smooth despite decades of exposure, the dome turning 15 degrees before locking into place with a metallic click that echoed through the clearing. Ranger barked sharply, circling in agitation as the rotation revealed what had been hidden beneath moss and soil, a square outline of reinforced steel set into the concrete foundation. A hatch, concealed until the dome's rotation aligned it with an access point. Michael crouched to examine the new discovery, heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The hatch was military-grade, designed for security rather than convenience, its surface unmarked by rust despite years underground. Sarah knelt beside him, voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, it's like the whole thing is some kind of machine." Michael couldn't answer, his mind filled with implications, each more unsettling than the last. This was no abandoned experiment in sustainable living. The dome was a deliberate disguise, a sophisticated mechanism designed to conceal something beneath. Whatever lay below had been important enough to hide with considerable expense and engineering skill. He brushed away soil from the hatch's edges, revealing a recessed handle and what appeared to be a keypad, now dark and presumably inactive after years without power. The solar panels suddenly made sense. They weren't for the dome itself, but to maintain minimal power to whatever lay beneath. Sarah's face showed no fear, only intense curiosity. The distance between them had momentarily vanished, replaced by shared discovery. The feeling reminded Michael of teaching her to ride a bicycle, of helping with her first science project. Moments of connection that had grown increasingly rare since the divorce. They agreed not to attempt opening the hatch without proper tools and preparation. Michael took detailed photos, noting the hatch's dimensions and features. Before leaving, he searched the area more thoroughly, looking for additional clues about the dome's purpose or ownership. Near the tree line, partially buried under years of fallen leaves, Ranger discovered a weathered sign. The text had mostly faded, but the logo remained partially visible, a stylized helix surrounding the letters HW. Sarah brushed away dirt, squinting at the remnants of smaller text. Project commissioned by Trust Containment Protocols. On the drive back to the cabin, Michael and Sarah pieced together theories, each possibility seeming both plausible and inadequate. Government research facility? Corporate storage site? Doomsday bunker for some wealthy paranoid? The mystery had accomplished what months of forced weekend visits had failed to do, given them common ground, a shared puzzle demanding cooperation. The black Mercedes appeared as they rounded the final curve toward the cabin, its polished surface incongruous against the rutted dirt driveway. Michael slowed the truck, instinctively assessing the situation. One vehicle, one visible occupant, no immediate signs of backup or surveillance. Still, the unannounced visitor triggered the same alertness he'd felt at the dome. Ranger growled low in his throat, hackles rising, a reaction the dog reserved for genuine threats. Michael placed a calming hand on the German Shepherd's neck, signaling him to stay vigilant but controlled. To Sarah, he gave quiet instructions. Stay in the truck until I signal. If anything happens, there's an emergency phone in the glove compartment, pre-programmed with Clyde's number. The man leaning against the Mercedes straightened as Michael approached. Everything about him seemed precision-engineered, the tailored charcoal suit unmarred by wrinkles despite the long drive, the leather shoes gleaming despite the rural dust, the silver watch catching afternoon sunlight at his wrist. His smile came too quickly, too practiced, revealing teeth as perfect and uniform as his appearance. Victor Lang, representing Northbridge Realty Group. His voice carried the polished neutrality of someone who conducted business in boardrooms rather than cabins, who discussed millions rather than thousands. He extended a business card, heavy stock with embossed lettering, professional but deliberately vague about Northbridge's specific functions. Michael examined the card without taking it, maintaining distance. Lang's smile never faltered as he explained that his firm specialized in acquiring unique or underdeveloped properties throughout the region. He'd heard through local channels that Michael might have encountered an unusual structure during his forest excursions, a structure Northbridge had particular interest in for historical and architectural significance. The precision of Lang's knowledge set alarm bells ringing in Michael's mind. No one should have known about the dome, not the clerk who denied its existence, not Clyde who spoke of it in whispers, certainly not a real estate executive from outside Ravenwood. Lang continued smoothly, explaining that Northbridge was prepared to compensate Michael generously. He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope thick with cash, if he would agree to forget about the tween and avoid mentioning it to others. A simple matter of professional courtesy, ensuring the property could be properly assessed without local interference or premature speculation. $20,000 in the envelope, another $30,000 upon signing a standard non-disclosure agreement. Lang's tone suggested he was offering a favor rather than a bribe, an opportunity rather than a threat. But his eyes never smiled with his mouth, and they flicked repeatedly toward the truck where Sarah waited, a calculation occurring behind the practiced pleasantness. Ranger remained tense, a continuous low growl emanating from deep in his chest. The dog's reaction confirmed what Michael already sensed. Lang represented danger, not opportunity. The envelope remained extended between them, cash visible enough to emphasize its substantiality. $50,000 would solve the foreclosure problem instantly. It would keep the cabin, preserve Sarah's visits, restore some measure of stability to Michael's collapsing life, all for the simple price of walking away from a mystery that wasn't his to solve anyway. Michael thought of the foreclosure notice, of Sarah's face when she'd seen it, of the bank manager's public mockery of his financial struggles. Then he thought of the fresh footprints around the dome, of the maintained solar panels, of Lang somehow knowing exactly what Michael had found. The wrongness deepened. He declined with deliberate casualness, explaining that he had no information worth purchasing, that his forest hikes were personal recreation rather than property assessment. Lang's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, his posture shifting from salesman to something harder, more reminiscent of the military officers who delivered unwelcome orders with cordial detachment. You should reconsider, Mr. Reynolds. Decisions made in haste often lead to missed opportunities. The subtle emphasis transformed the statement from advice to warning. Lang glanced again toward the truck, toward Sarah, the look lingering just long enough to ensure Michael caught its significance. Lang departed with the same practiced cordiality, but the atmosphere he left behind felt charged with unstated threat. As the Mercedes disappeared down the rutted driveway, Sarah joined Michael on the porch, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. When Michael explained the visitor's interest in the dome, her eyes widened. How did he even know about it? The question hung between them, its implications expanding into the gathering dusk. That evening, Michael researched Northbridge Realty Group online, finding only a bare-bones website with generic corporate language and no specific address beyond a P.O. box in Delaware. The phone number on Lang's card connected to a virtual switchboard rather than a physical office. Every aspect of the company seemed designed to present legitimacy while revealing nothing of substance. Sarah's internet search proved more productive. The faded logo they'd found near the dome, HW, likely stood for Helios Works, an architectural firm that had operated from 1980 to 1996, specializing in innovative containment solutions for corporate and government clients. The firm had dissolved after its founder died in a boating accident, its projects either completed or absorbed by larger companies. One grainy photograph in an archived trade journal showed the Helios Works founder standing before what appeared to be a partial dome structure, similar in design to the one they discovered. The caption mentioned specialized storage solutions with rotational security features, a description that matched exactly what they'd witnessed in the forest. As they were preparing for bed, Michael noticed Sarah staring at the foreclosure notice still pinned to the refrigerator. He started to explain, to offer reassurances he didn't believe, but she cut him off with unexpected directness. "I'm not a little kid anymore, Dad. You don't have to pretend everything's okay." The simple honesty of her statement hit harder than anger would have. Michael sat heavily at the kitchen table, the weight of his failures pressing down with physical force. For the first time, he told Sarah the complete truth about the construction business collapsing, about the medical bills from his last deployment, about the unanswered disability claims, about the foreclosure becoming final in 3 weeks. He had no solutions to offer, no paternal wisdom to dispense, only the raw facts of their situation. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression serious beyond her years. When Michael finished, she asked practical questions about alternatives, timelines, legal options, approaching the problem with analytical clarity that reminded him painfully of her mother. Then she surprised him with a question about the dome and Lang's offer. If that place is worth $50,000 to someone, doesn't that mean it's important? And if it's important, couldn't that help us somehow? The question revealed both innocence and insight. Michael explained the ethical problems with Lang's offer, the implicit threat in his manner, the wrongness of the entire interaction. But Sarah's question lingered in his mind as they settled into their bedrooms for the night. Through the thin cabin walls, Michael heard Sarah's voice as she spoke on her phone, presumably to friends or her mother. The foreclosure, the dome, Lang's visit, all would be part of her narrative now. Stories to share about her increasingly strange weekends with her struggling father. The thought filled him with a mixture of shame and resignation. Sleep came reluctantly, interrupted by dreams of the dome rotating endlessly, of Sarah disappearing down the hatch while Lang watched from the tree line, smiling his perfect, empty smile. Morning brought weak sunlight and a new determination. Michael woke before dawn, checking doors and windows out of ingrained caution before starting breakfast. The familiar routine of cooking for Sarah's visits, pancakes from scratch, bacon, fresh coffee, provided temporary normalcy. Ranger sat alert near the door, his vigilance more pronounced than usual. Sarah emerged from her room already dressed, hair pulled back, expression focused. She'd been researching Helios Works and dome architecture on her phone, finding additional connections between the firm and various government contracts in the early 1990s. The company had specialized in secure containment and document preservation environments, corporate language for highly specialized vaults. Before they could discuss further plans, Michael noticed Ranger's sudden alertness at the window. The dog's ears pricked forward, a low warning growl building in his chest. Michael moved cautiously to the window, staying to one side as he'd been trained, and saw what had triggered Ranger's response. His truck, parked in the gravel drive, had been vandalized during the night. All four tires had been slashed, the rubber shredded beyond repair. The driver's side door bore a deep gouge running from headlight to taillight, cutting through paint and metal. The message was unsubtle but effective, a demonstration of access and intent, a reminder that isolation worked both ways. Whoever had done this had approached within 30 feet of where they slept, had taken their time, had left without triggering Ranger's alertness until now. The violation of their space hit Michael with physical force. The cabin had been his refuge, his one remaining asset, the place where he at least maintained the illusion of providing for his daughter. Now it felt exposed, permeable, watched. The strategic part of his mind assessed security weaknesses, while the father in him calculated how to protect Sarah from the escalating situation. They called the sheriff's office, but with weekend staffing and rural response times, the deputy wouldn't arrive for at least 2 hours. The truck was undrivable, the nearest neighbor 3 miles away. Michael's phone showed the foreclosure notice from the bank had been updated. Timeline accelerated, final payment now due in 2 weeks rather than 3. The timing couldn't be coincidence. Sarah watched him with growing concern as he paced the cabin, checking sightlines from windows, mentally cataloging their supplies and options. She's seen him like this before, in the months after his return from Afghanistan, hyper-vigilant, tactical, distant. But this time she didn't withdraw. Instead, she moved to the kitchen table and spread out her notes about the dome, Helios Works, and local history. We need to understand what we're dealing with. Information is leverage, right? That's what you always say. The simple statement realigned something in Michael's perspective. His daughter wasn't just a responsibility to be protected. She was a partner in this situation, observant and resourceful in ways he'd failed to recognize. The mystery of the dome had created a connection between them, a shared purpose stronger than the weekend visits and awkward conversations of the past 2 years. They spent the morning developing a methodical approach to the dome investigation. Sarah created a timeline of Helios Works projects, cross-referencing with historical events in Ravenwood. Michael sketched the dome's dimensions and mechanical features from memory, applying his engineering training from the military to analyze its likely construction and purpose. The phone rang just after noon, an unrecognized number with a local area code. Michael answered cautiously, putting the call on speaker so Sarah could hear. The voice on the other end was elderly, rough with age, but precise in diction. Thomas Norris, retired engineer, former contractor with Helios Works. He'd heard from Clyde at the general store that Michael had been asking questions about a certain structure in the northern woods. The call could be trap, Michael knew, another pressure tactic from Lang or whoever he represented. But something in Norris's voice rang true, a directness that contrasted with Lang's polished evasiveness. When Norris described specific technical details about the dome's rotation mechanism that matched exactly what they'd observed, Michael's suspicion gave way to cautious interest. Norris wouldn't discuss details over the phone, but suggested meeting tomorrow at a diner 30 miles from Ravenwood, far enough to avoid local attention. He'd bring original design documents from his personal archives, information he'd kept despite signing non-disclosure agreements decades ago. "Time doesn't erase responsibility," he said cryptically before ending the call. The sheriff's deputy finally arrived mid-afternoon, a young officer who documented the vandalism with board efficiency, ascribing it to teenage mischief or hunters with grudges about property boundaries. No cameras in the area, no witnesses, no useful evidence beyond the damage itself. He offered Michael a ride into town to arrange repairs, but with the nearest tire service closed until Monday, the truck would remain disabled for at least 2 days. As the deputy's cruiser disappeared down the gravel drive, Michael felt the isolation of their position with renewed clarity. The cabin sat at the end of a half-mile private road, surrounded by forest on 3 sides. Beautiful and remote under normal circumstances, vulnerable and exposed now that someone had demonstrated both knowledge of their location and willingness to act against them. Sarah suggested using her mother's scheduled pickup tomorrow as an opportunity. Jessica could drive them to meet Norris instead of taking Sarah back to town. Michael hesitated, reluctant to involve his ex-wife in a situation he didn't fully understand, but practicality won out over pride. One phone call later, Jessica agreed to the change plans with minimal questions, assuming the truck problems were simple mechanical failure rather than targeted vandalism. That night, Michael checked the cabin's perimeter repeatedly, Ranger at his side. He moved Sarah's bedroom to the central part of the cabin, away from external walls and windows. Every unusual sound from the surrounding forest heightened his alertness, every shadow potentially concealing observers or threats. The hypervigilance felt familiar, the same state that had kept him alive in combat zones but made civilian life so exhausting afterward. Sarah watched him with quiet understanding, helping to secure windows, asking thoughtful questions about home defense that revealed both her concern and her trust in his protection. When she finally went to sleep, Michael remained awake, settled in a chair with sight lines to both the front door and Sarah's room, Ranger alert at his feet. In the deepest part of night, when even the forest fell silent, Michael's phone lit up with a text message from an unknown number. "Walk away while you can, the dome isn't yours to find." No signature, no further explanation, just the warning floating on the screen like a voice from the darkness. Michael deleted the message, but not before taking a screenshot as evidence. The threat, combined with the truck vandalism and Lang's visit, created a pattern too deliberate to ignore. Whatever lay beneath the dome carried significance beyond mere property value. Someone wanted it to remain hidden, undisturbed, forgotten. Someone with resources, information, and a willingness to escalate from observation to intimidation. As dawn painted the eastern sky with pale light, Michael made his decision. He would not be driven away by threats. He would not surrender Sarah's weekend visits to foreclosure. He would not return to the purposeless drift that had characterized the 2 years since his discharge. The dome represented mystery, bueno, but also opportunity, a chance to reclaim agency in a life that had been spiraling beyond his control. When Sarah emerged from her room, eyes still heavy with sleep, he outlined their next steps. Meet Norris, gather information, assess options, make a plan. Her answering smile carried a warmth he hadn't seen directed toward him in months. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, Michael felt something like his former self, focused, determined, moving toward a goal rather than away from memories. Jessica arrived mid-morning in her immaculate SUV, expression shifting from annoyed to concerned when she saw the vandalized truck. Michael provided a simplified explanation. Likely teenagers or hunters, nothing serious, just inconvenient timing. He didn't mention Lang, the dome, or the text message. Those complications would only reinforce Jessica's conviction that weekends with him exposed Sarah to instability. The drive to the meeting with Norris gave Michael time to organize his thoughts, to separate facts from speculation, to prepare questions that might clarify the dome's significance without revealing how little they actually knew. Sarah sat beside him in the back seat, occasionally squeezing his hand when Jessica's attention focused on the road, a small gesture of solidarity that steadied him more than she could know. The diner sat just off the highway, its aging neon sign buzzing in the gray afternoon light. Inside, vinyl booths and laminate tables hosted scattered customers, truckers mainly, a few locals nursing coffee. In the farthest corner, a man who could only be Thomas Norris hunched over a steaming mug, his weathered hands wrapped around it as if absorbing warmth. Norris had the papery skin and prominent veins of advanced age, but his eyes remained sharp beneath bushy white eyebrows. A leather portfolio rested on the table beside him, its surface cracked and worn with decades of use. When he spotted Michael and Sarah approaching, he straightened slightly, assessing them with the focused attention of someone accustomed to evaluating structural integrity. Jessica had agreed to return in 2 hours, leaving them the afternoon to conduct what she assumed was a consultation about the vandalized truck. As she pulled away from the diner, Michael felt the weight of multiple deceptions, necessary ones, he told himself, to protect both Jessica and Sarah from complications they shouldn't have to navigate. Norris waited until they were seated before speaking, his voice low enough to require leaning forward to hear. I worked for Helios from '89 to '95, specialized in rotation mechanisms and hydraulic systems. That thing you found in Fice Woods? I designed half of it. The rotation feature, the lead-lined chamber underneath, the emergency access protocols. But I never knew what they planned to store inside. That information was compartmentalized. Engineers like me built components, never saw the complete picture. He opened the leather portfolio, removing yellowed blueprints protected in plastic sleeves. The technical drawings matched the dome's appearance precisely, with additional details of the underground chamber. A cylindrical space approximately 30 feet in diameter, its walls lined with lead panels 2 inches thick, accessible only through the rotation mechanism that Michael and Sarah had accidentally triggered. The original client name had been redacted from the blueprints, replaced with a project code, Operation Secure Echo. But Norris pointed to a small logo in the corner, partially obscured by an approval stamp. The distinctive D emblem of Dominion Trust, a banking institution that had collapsed in the early 2000s amid allegations of money laundering and financial crimes. Norris's hands trembled slightly as he turned to the final page, a schematic of the massive vault door designed to seal the underground chamber. I didn't make the connection until years later, when Dominion's collapse made headlines. By then, Helios had dissolved, most records destroyed in a convenient warehouse fire. But I kept my copies. Insurance, I told myself. Or maybe penance. The old engineer's voice carried the weight of decades-old regret as he explained how Dominion Trust had commissioned similar structures in remote locations throughout the country. Secure storage for documents and assets that needed to remain outside official banking channels. The dome design provided both physical security and plausible deniability. From satellite imagery, it appeared to be nothing more than an abandoned architectural experiment. After Dominion's collapse, the storage facilities should have been seized as assets, their contents cataloged and processed through proper legal channels. But several locations, including the Ravenwood Dome, had mysteriously vanished from official records, erased from property listings, removed from tax rolls, excised from banking inventories. They became ghosts known only to a dwindling number of former insiders. And now, Norris continued, some of those insiders had reorganized under new corporate structures. Apex Meridian Group had absorbed many of Dominion's former executives, establishing similar operations with more sophisticated concealment. The name struck Michael like a physical blow. Lang had mentioned no affiliation beyond Northbridge Realty, but the connection was now clear. The real estate company served as a front for Apex Meridian, which itself served as a legitimate face for former Dominion operations. Sarah, who had been listening with intense focus, asked the question forming in Michael's mind. What's inside the vault that's worth all this secrecy? Worth threatening us over? Norris's expression darkened. Records, most likely. Transaction histories, client lists, evidence of financial crimes that haven't reached their statute of limitations. Names of people who've since established new identities in business and politics. The kind of information that ruins careers and triggers investigations. The kind worth protecting at significant cost. He turned to Michael, eyes suddenly fierce despite his age. They'll escalate beyond vandalism, Mr. Reynolds. I've watched Apex Meridian's methods over the years. They start with offers, move to intimidation, then to elimination of problems. The fact that they've moved this quickly suggests whatever's in that vault is particularly sensitive. Timing matters to them for some reason. The implications settled over the table like a physical weight. Michael thought of the threats already demonstrated, Lang's visit, the vandalized truck, the anonymous text message. He thought of Sarah's safety, of his responsibility as her father, of the foreclosure threatening to destabilize her life further. The path forward seemed suddenly clear and overwhelmingly dangerous. Norris sensed his thoughts, placing a gnarled hand on the blueprints. I'm not telling you this so you'll walk away, son. I'm telling you so you'll understand what you're facing. 25 years I've carried the knowledge of what I helped build. 25 years wondering what secrets got buried in those vaults. Maybe it's time some of those secrets saw daylight. The conviction in the old man's voice resonated with something long dormant in Michael. The sense of purpose that had led him to military service. The belief in standing against wrongdoing, regardless of personal cost. He glanced at Sarah, expecting to see fear in her expression. Instead, he found the same determination he felt building in himself. Before they left, Norris provided one final piece of information. The emergency access sequence for the vault door, a combination of mechanical overrides designed for use if the primary electronic systems failed. The sequence was noted in the blueprint margins, a maintenance reference never intended for unauthorized use. Whether it would still function after decades remained uncertain, but it offered a potential entry point beyond the damaged keypad they had observed. Outside the diner, waiting for Jessica's return, Michael and Sarah stood in the parking lot as light snow began to fall. The white flakes caught in Sarah's dark hair as she looked up at her father, her expression more open than he'd seen in years. We're going back to the dome, aren't we? The question wasn't really a question at all, but an acknowledgement of shared purpose. Michael nodded, feeling simultaneously protective and proud of his daughter's courage. They would return to the dome, not because of the foreclosure or financial pressure, but because something larger had found them. A chance to right decades-old wrongs, to stand against the kind of powerful interests that typically operated beyond accountability. As Jessica's SUV appeared on the horizon, Michael squeezed Sarah's shoulder gently. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, the static in his chest had quieted completely, replaced by focused clarity. The dome wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a mission. And missions, he remembered from his military days, required planning, resources, and absolute commitment. The weekend visit would end tomorrow, with Sarah returning to Jessica's house for the school week. But something fundamental had shifted between father and daughter, a new alliance forged by shared discovery and common purpose. Whatever lay beneath the dome, they would face it together, a team formed by circumstance but strengthened by choice. Jessica's questions about the meeting received carefully edited responses. Consultant about truck repairs, discussion of insurance options, consideration of legal action against the vandals. The partial truths maintained the fragile peace between former spouses while protecting Jessica from complications she hadn't chosen to engage with. The drive back to the cabin passed in contemplative silence, Sarah occasionally meeting Michael's eyes in the rearview mirror, small nods communicating shared understanding. The foreclosure notice still waited on the refrigerator. The vandalized truck still sat useless in the driveway. But these problems had receded from foreground to background, overshadowed by larger considerations. As they turned onto the private road leading to the cabin, Michael noticed fresh tire tracks in the muddy gravel. Too recent to be from the sheriff's deputy that morning, too deep for a standard passenger vehicle. Someone had visited during their absence, someone driving a heavier vehicle than Lang's Mercedes. Ranger's reaction confirmed his suspicion. The German shepherd stood at the cabin door, hackles raised, a continuous low growl emanating from his throat. Michael signaled Sarah and Jessica to remain in the SUV while he approached cautiously, scanning for signs of forced entry or further vandalism. The cabin appeared untouched from outside, but Michael's combat instincts registered subtle wrongness. A curtain slightly askew, Ranger's heightened alertness, the feeling of recent disturbance that couldn't be articulated but couldn't be ignored. Someone had been here, had likely entered the cabin, had departed without leaving obvious evidence beyond the tire tracks and the invisible currents that triggered Ranger's protective response. Jessica, watching from the SUV, interpreted his caution as response to the earlier vandalism. Michael allowed the misunderstanding to stand, providing reassurance without detail, focusing on getting Sarah safely inside to assess what might have been disturbed or taken. Once Jessica departed with promises to call later, Michael and Sarah conducted a methodical search of the cabin. Nothing obvious had been stolen. Laptop still in place, Sarah's phone on her bedside table, Michael's few valuables untouched in their drawer. But subtle signs of intrusion accumulated. Chair positions slightly changed, cabinet doors not fully closed, the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne lingering near Michael's desk. The purpose became clear when Sarah noticed her research notes about the dome were arranged differently than she'd left them. Someone had examined their information, assessed their knowledge, evaluated their progress. Not theft, but intelligence gathering. The actions of professionals determining exactly what Michael and Sarah had learned and what they might do next. The violation reinforced the seriousness of their situation while simultaneously confirming they were on the right track. Whatever lay beneath the dome carried significance beyond ordinary concern. The escalating pattern, observation, then Lang's visit, then vandalism, now intrusion, suggested increasing desperation to discourage their investigation. As darkness gathered outside the cabin windows, Michael made his decision. They would not wait for the next escalation. Tomorrow, after Sarah returned to Jessica's house for the school week, he would prepare thoroughly, gathering supplies and equipment from Clyde's store. The following weekend, he and Sarah would return to the dome with proper tools and Norris's access codes. They would discover what lay in the vault beneath the forest floor, what secrets warranted such determined protection. For tonight, they secured the cabin as best they could, chairs wedged under doorknobs, windows locked and curtains drawn, ranger positioned near the main entrance. The precautions were symbolic more than effective. If professionals wanted access again, such measures would barely slow them. But the actions provided structure, a semblance of control in a situation increasingly defined by unseen forces and unknown agendas. In the kitchen, Sarah heated leftover stew while Michael checked and rechecked the cabin's perimeter. The domesticity of the scene contrasted sharply with the tension of their circumstances, creating a strange dissonance. Ordinary life continuing alongside extraordinary discovery and escalating threat. Michael watched his daughter moving confidently through the small kitchen, her earlier distance replaced by purposeful engagement. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, something valuable had emerged from this weekend. A restoration of connection, a shared commitment, a bridge across the gulf that had formed between them after his return from deployment and the divorce that followed. Whatever happened with the dome, whatever consequences might follow their investigation, this reconnection with Sarah represented success of a kind he'd almost stopped believing possible. The static that had filled his chest for so long, the formless anxiety, the directionless tension, the sense of life without purpose, had given way to clarity and focus. He had direction again. He had a mission. Most importantly, he had his daughter's trust, something no bank could foreclose and no threat could diminish. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new risks, new decisions. But tonight, in this moment of temporary security, Michael allowed himself to acknowledge what had been missing since his return to civilian life. The conviction that his actions mattered, that standing against wrongdoing served purpose beyond himself, that courage in the face of threat defined character more profoundly than comfort in the absence of challenge. As they ate dinner, Sarah looked up from her bowl with unexpected directness. "Whatever's down there, I'm glad we found it together." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. Acknowledgement of shared peril, recognition of reconnection, commitment to the path ahead regardless of difficulty. Michael nodded, throat suddenly tight with emotion he couldn't express but didn't need to. Some understandings transcended words. Some bonds strengthened through action rather than declaration. Outside, snow continued falling, covering the forest in crystalline silence, concealing the vandalized truck, erasing the intruder's footprints, blanketing the world in temporary purity. But beneath that pristine surface, the dome waited, its secrets intact, its guardians alert, its significance undiminished by weather or time or human hesitation. Michael Reynolds, Afghanistan veteran, struggling father, man on the edge of financial ruin, felt the familiar calm of mission acceptance settle over him. The clarity that came with commitment to necessary action regardless of personal cost. Whatever lay beneath the dome would not remain hidden much longer. Whatever forces protected those secrets would soon discover that threats and intimidation couldn't deter a man who had already faced the worst that war and life could offer. Sometimes salvation came from unexpected directions. Sometimes purpose emerged from random discovery. Sometimes a father and daughter found connection through shared courage rather than shared comfort. These were the thoughts that accompanied Michael into sleep that night, Ranger vigilant beside the bed, Sarah safe in the next room, the dome waiting in the forest beyond. Sunday morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through the cabin windows. Michael woke early, mentally preparing for Sarah's return to her mother's house that afternoon. The revelations about the dome and Lang's threats had transformed their weekend from routine visitation into something profound, a shared mission that had bridged the growing distance between them. After breakfast, Michael watched as Sarah gathered her belongings, noticing how she carefully packed the notes and research about Helios Works alongside her school supplies. Jessica would arrive in a few hours, expecting nothing more than a normal custody exchange, unaware of the events that had transpired. "We'll continue next weekend," Sarah said, her voice carrying determination that hadn't been there when she arrived. "I'll research more about Dominion Trust at the library." Michael nodded, grateful for her commitment, but concerned about the risks. "Be careful. Don't make it obvious what you're looking for." Once Jessica had collected Sarah and their SUV disappeared down the driveway, Michael felt the silence settle around him with physical weight. The cabin seemed emptier than usual, the vandalized truck in the driveway a constant reminder of the threat they now faced. With Sarah gone, he needed to prepare for what came next. His phone rang, an unrecognized number with a local area code. Answering cautiously, Michael heard an elderly voice introduce himself as Thomas Norris, retired engineer and former contractor with Helios Works. The unexpected call offered a glimmer of hope in solving the dome's mystery, along with much-needed transportation. "I can be there in 2 hours with a trailer," Norris said. "That truck of yours needs proper repairs, and we have much to discuss about what you found." Michael felt relief washing through him as Norris offered to drive from his home 30 miles away, explaining he had a trailer that could transport the damaged truck to town. It seemed the old man had committed fully to their cause, his decades of silence about the Dome project giving way to unexpected alliance. When Norris arrived 2 hours later, Michael noted how the engineer's rusted Ford F-250 matched its owner. Weathered, functional, resilient, despite age. The trailer hitched behind looked equally well used but meticulously maintained. Norris himself moved with the deliberate economy of someone managing pain but refusing to acknowledge limitations. As they loaded the vandalized truck onto the trailer, Norris spoke in the measured tones of someone who had rehearsed his thoughts carefully. The vault beneath that dome wasn't just another storage facility. It was designated Omega Class, their highest security rating. Dual lock systems, atmospheric controls, electromagnetic shielding, the kind of precautions usually reserved for sensitive government installations. Norris tightened the chains securing the truck with hands that trembled slightly but never faltered. Dominion Trust collapsed in 2003, right around the time certain high-profile political careers were taking off. The timing wasn't coincidental. Neither is Lang's sudden interest all these years later. The drive to town gave Michael time to process these revelations, the truck repair arrangements providing cover for deeper conversation. Norris explained how Helios Works had specialized in creating secure facilities with plausible alternative explanations, sustainable housing experiments, private research stations, environmental monitoring posts. The dome's design intentionally mimicked architectural trends from the early 90s, ensuring that any accidental discovery would seem unremarkable. The garage owner whistled through his teeth at the damage to Michael's truck, specifying parts that would need ordering from Spokane or Seattle. 3 days minimum before repairs could be completed. 3 days without transportation in a situation where mobility might become survival. Norris offered his guest room without hesitation. The unexpected generosity caught Michael off guard, but the practical advantages were undeniable. Staying at the cabin alone invited further intimidation or worse. The truck vandalism had demonstrated how vulnerable his location made him. The engineer's home sat on 5 acres outside the neighboring town of Millbrook, a modest rancher surrounded by workshop outbuildings and carefully maintained gardens. Inside, bookshelves lined every available wall, technical manuals and engineering texts arranged with mathematical precision. Photographs on the mantle showed a younger Norris beside complex mechanical systems, his expression serious but eyes bright with purpose. No wife visible in the photos, no children. When Michael asked, Norris answered with practiced neutrality. Engineering was my spouse, work my offspring. The projects consumed everything else. Only in retirement did I recognize the imbalance. The guest room contained a single bed with military corners, a desk with lamp, and a small bookshelf filled with volumes on structural engineering and architectural history. Functional, Spartan, organized. Michael recognized something of himself in the space. The disciplined simplicity of someone who found comfort in order and purpose rather than luxury. That evening, Norris spread the dome blueprints across his dining table, adding personal notes and photographs from his Helios works days. The documentation revealed a project far more sophisticated than its weathered exterior suggested. The rotation mechanism incorporated redundant hydraulic systems. The lead-lined chamber featured atmospheric regulators, maintaining precise temperature and humidity. The vault door utilized dual locking mechanisms requiring separate access codes. Michael's military engineering training allowed him to grasp the technical aspects, but the implications staggered him. The facility represented millions in early 90s dollars, dedicated to protecting contents valuable enough to justify that investment in decades of maintenance since. Norris pointed to a notation in the margin beside the vault door specifications. Plan secure echo. Containment protocols standard. S-class materials only. His finger trembled slightly as it traced the words. The classification terminology matches what financial institutions use for extremely sensitive client information. Records that could destroy reputations, trigger investigations, implicate officials. When Michael asked why Norris had kept the blueprints despite non-disclosure agreements, the old man's expression hardened with quiet determination. Some burdens can't be set down just because a contract says so. I helped build a fortress for secrets that should never have been buried. That responsibility doesn't expire. The simple statement resonated with Michael's military experience. The weight of actions taken under orders, the moral complexity that remained long after discharge papers were signed. Norris had carried his knowledge for decades, waiting for an opportunity to correct what he increasingly viewed as complicity in wrongdoing. As they prepared for sleep, Michael's phone chimed with an incoming text from Sarah. Found something. Dominion Trust scandal connected to current Senator Hartford's early campaign. Articles disappeared from newspaper archives, but still in library microfilm. We'll bring copies next weekend. The message confirmed what Michael already suspected. The dome's secrets extended beyond simple financial fraud into political realms where exposure carried more devastating consequences. Sarah's research skills had uncovered connections that professional journalists had either missed or been pressured to ignore. His daughter's resourcefulness filled him with pride even as it intensified his protective instincts. Morning brought rain that drummed against the metal roof of Norris's workshop as they inventoried equipment for the coming weekend's dome exploration. Crowbars, bolt cutters, battery-powered lights, emergency tools, items that could be explained as standard preparation for cabin maintenance, but would serve their true purpose beneath the forest floor. Midway through their preparations, Norris received a call that drained the color from his weathered face. He set the phone down with unnatural care, hands trembling more pronouncedly than before. Clyde Johnson had a stroke last night, found unconscious in his store this morning. Doctor says it looks natural, but the timing, the implication hung between them. Impossible to verify, but equally impossible to dismiss. Clyde had connected Michael with Norris, had spoken openly about the dome's existence, had demonstrated knowledge that certain parties clearly wanted suppressed. A natural medical emergency provided perfect cover for those with resources and motivation to eliminate problems discreetly. Michael felt the threat level shifting beneath his feet, from intimidation to potential elimination of witnesses, from pressure to life-threatening consequence. The progression followed the pattern Norris had warned about at their first meeting. His thoughts turned immediately to Sarah, vulnerable at school where unknown observers had already photographed her. He called Jessica with a carefully constructed story about a school project requiring Sarah's early pickup, his voice calibrated for concerned parent rather than alarm protector. Jessica's initial resistance dissolved when Michael emphasized the project's importance to Sarah's grades, her competitive nature unable to risk academic disadvantage for their daughter. While Michael arranged Sarah's protection through misdirection, Norris made calls to former colleagues, carefully worded inquiries about Dominion Trust's collapse and the current activities of its former executives. The answers painted a disturbing picture of organizational resurrection under new corporate identities, primarily Apex Meridian Group. a financial services conglomerate with holdings in real estate, private security, and data management. Apex had systematically acquired properties and assets connected to Dominion's former operations, employing many ex-Dominion executives in senior positions. The corporate structure utilized multiple shell companies and holding firms, creating deliberate opacity around ownership and activities. Northbridge Realty, Lang's supposed employer, appeared on organization charts as a subsidiary specializing in property reclamation and historical asset management. By midday, Michael received confirmation that Jessica had collected Sarah from school without incident. His relief proved short-lived when Sarah called from Jessica's phone, her voice tight with controlled fear. Someone was watching the school. Black SUV, two men taking photos. Mom didn't notice, but I saw them following until we hit the highway. Michael's military training kicked in, mind cycling through threat assessment, security protocols, extraction options. He instructed Sarah to remain at Jessica's house, to stay away from windows, to explain nothing to her mother that might place Jessica in danger through knowledge. The partial truths felt necessary but left a bitter taste. His daughter shouldering adult burdens, while her mother remained oblivious to potential threats against their family. As Michael ended the call, Norris appeared in the workshop doorway, expression grave. One of his former Helios colleagues had just been visited by men claiming to represent a documentary production company, asking detailed questions about projects from the early 90s. The timing and specificity suggested a coordinated effort to identify anyone with knowledge about the dome's construction or purpose. The pattern clarified with chilling precision. Lang's initial approach followed by escalating intimidation, now expanding to systematic identification and neutralization of potential information sources. Michael and Sarah had stumbled into something far larger than simple financial fraud, something with tentacles reaching into present-day power structures and individuals willing to protect those interests through increasingly aggressive means. That afternoon, they visited the hospital where Clyde remained unconscious in intensive care. The official diagnosis confirmed stroke, but subtle details nagged at Michael's combat-honed instincts. The lack of prior symptoms in a man known for regular medical checkups, the precise timing following his assistance to Michael, the convenient absence of witnesses when he collapsed. The attending physician mentioned unusual aspects of Clyde's condition, blood work showing anomalies difficult to reconcile with standard stroke pathology, response patterns inconsistent with typical cerebrovascular events. Nothing definitive enough to trigger investigation, but sufficient to reinforce Michael's growing certainty that natural causes provided convenient cover for deliberate action. As they left the hospital, Michael spotted a black sedan in the parking lot, its windows tinted beyond legal limits, its position offering clear sightlines to the hospital entrance. The vehicle matched descriptions from others who had experienced Apex Meridian's attention. The same model photographing Sarah at school, the same distinctive modifications suggesting specialized usage rather than consumer purchase. Norris noticed Michael's attention shift and followed his gaze to the sedan. Without breaking stride, the old engineer altered their path to approach from an angle that would force the vehicle's occupants to turn noticeably to track their movement. The simple counter-surveillance technique confirmed Michael's suspicion. The driver adjusted position to maintain visual contact, the movement too deliberate for coincidence. They drove back to Norris's house using a circuitous route, employing basic evasion techniques to identify potential tails. No vehicles followed consistently, but Michael couldn't shake the certainty of observation. Perhaps from cameras at intersections, perhaps from informants within local businesses, perhaps from methods he hadn't yet identified. The pressure continued building through the evening as Sarah sent updates from Jessica's house. Strange calls disconnecting when answered, unfamiliar vehicles passing repeatedly, small anomalies that individually seemed meaningless, but collectively formed a pattern of surveillance and intimidation. Jessica remained unaware, attributing Sarah's concerns to imagination or adolescent drama. Michael's protective instincts screamed for immediate action. Collect Sarah, find secure location, establish defensive position. But rational analysis counseled patience, planning, proper preparation. Hasty movement would only confirm the importance of what they discovered, potentially accelerating whatever timetable their opponents followed. Instead, he focused on what they could control, gathering information, assembling equipment, developing contingency plans for the weekend's dome exploration. The methodical approach provided structure amid growing uncertainty, the familiar process of mission preparation anchoring him against rising anxiety about threats he couldn't yet fully identify or counter. Norris proved an unexpectedly valuable ally, his engineering precision translating effectively to operational planning. He created detailed schematics of the dome's interior based on original blueprints, identifying optimal entry points, potential hazards, defensive positions if confrontation occurred. His age-limited physical capability, but enhanced strategic thinking, experience compensating for diminished strength. Wednesday morning brought news that Michael's truck repairs would take longer than initially estimated. Parts delayed, additional damage discovered, completion timeline extended to the following week. The setback confirmed Michael's suspicion of deliberate interference, though proving such subtle sabotage remained impossible. When Michael mentioned the delay to Norris, the engineer offered his own vehicle without hesitation. They're watching the truck repairs, expecting that to keep you immobilized. Using my car disrupts their expectations, creates temporary advantage. The simple tactical insight demonstrated why Norris had thrived in specialized engineering. The ability to analyze systems, identify vulnerabilities, develop solutions that opponents wouldn't anticipate. Michael recognized the same thinking that had kept his unit alive in Afghanistan. Not superiority of resources, but creative application of available assets against adversaries who expected conventional responses. That afternoon, Michael drove Norris's truck to the county records office in the neighboring town of Lakeside, 30 miles from Ravenwood. The facility housed property documents too old for digital conversion, physical archives requiring in-person access. If the dome had existed on official records before being systematically erased, traces might remain in older filing systems resistant to electronic manipulation. The records clerk, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and suspicious eyes, watched Michael with undisguised mercy as he requested property maps for the Northern Forest region. Her reluctance softened slightly when he mentioned Thomas Norris, whose reputation apparently extended to county administration through decades of engineering consultations on local infrastructure projects. The maps revealed what Michael had suspected, a conspicuous absence where the dome stood, the parcel marked simply as Woodland Reserve without ownership designation. Surrounding properties showed normal documentation, transitions of title through decades, current taxpayer information. But the dome's location existed in bureaucratic limbo, neither public nor private, a blank space in otherwise comprehensive records. More telling were the clerk's own reactions. Subtle tension when Michael's finger traced the unmarked area, gaze shifting to the office door as if expecting interruption, voice lowering instinctively when discussing that particular section of forest. She knew something about the property's unusual status, but feared acknowledging that knowledge directly. As Michael prepared to leave, the clerk slipped him a torn piece of paper with a single name written in shaky handwriting: Frank Wilson, former FBI. The note disappeared into his pocket before anyone could observe the exchange, the clerk immediately busying herself with other documents as if the interaction had never occurred. Outside, Michael examined the name and recognized its significance immediately. During Dominion Trust's collapse, financial press had mentioned an FBI investigation led by Special Agent Frank Wilson, an inquiry that began aggressively but mysteriously decelerated before reaching conclusive findings. Wilson had subsequently resigned from the Bureau, citing personal reasons that many journalists implied were cover for professional frustration with interrupted investigation. Michael called Norris from the parking lot, relaying the unexpected lead. The engineer's response carried cautious optimism. Wilson lives about 4 hours away in Cascade Falls, retired after Dominion case shut down, tried going public with findings but got blocked at every turn, might still have case files they couldn't legally take from him. The possibility of FBI documentation, even incomplete or unofficial, represented significant advantage. Wilson's investigation would have established foundational evidence before being terminated, potentially identifying key players and financial mechanisms that connected past crimes to present-day power structures. Michael considered driving immediately to Cascade Falls, but rejected the impulse as tactically unsound. Better to maintain established patterns for now, avoid alerting observers to new information or contacts, preserve the element of surprise for when it offered maximum advantage. Wilson's potential assistance would remain a contingency option, valuable but reserved for the appropriate moment. Thursday morning brought unexpected development. Sheriff Davis from Ravenwood appeared at Norris's front door, expression unreadable beneath his department-issue Stetson. Michael tensed automatically, assessing the officer for threat indicators while calculating escape routes through the house's rear exit. The sheriff removed his hat with deliberate slowness, eyes scanning the living room before settling on Michael. Got report of suspicious persons near your cabin yesterday. Thought you'd want to know someone's been poking around while you're not there. The warning came wrapped in official notification, plausible deniability maintained through procedural language. Davis didn't specify who had been watching the cabin or why he personally delivered information that could have been communicated by phone. The subtext hung unspoken between them. Communication offered outside official channels, assistance provided without explicit acknowledgement. When Michael thanked him for the courtesy, Davis nodded almost imperceptibly. Funny thing about that dome structure north of town. Used to be on maps when I started with the department 20 years back. Then one day it wasn't. Records room had a small fire around that time. Selective damage, you might say. The sheriff departed without elaboration, leaving Michael to process the implicit message. Davis knew about the dome, knew about its removal from official records, suspected deliberate concealment rather than administrative error. Most importantly, he had chosen to share that knowledge with Michael rather than the parties currently surveilling the cabin. Another potential ally or another layer of complex game? Michael's combat experience had taught him the danger of assuming allegiances too quickly, of mistaking tactical alignment for strategic alliance. Davis might oppose whoever watched the cabin, but that didn't automatically make him trustworthy. That evening, Sarah called with new information gleaned from library archives. Microfilm copies of local newspapers from 2003 contained several articles about Dominion Trust that never appeared in digital archives. The stories mentioned political donations to then-State Senator James Hartford's first congressional campaign, funds later proven to originate from accounts implicated in Dominion's money laundering operations. Hartford had returned the donations when the connection became public, claiming ignorance of their source and expressing appropriate outrage at being associated with financial impropriety. The political damage had been minimal, a brief embarrassment quickly overshadowed by Hartford's compelling personal narrative as a small-town success story rising to national prominence. Sarah's research had uncovered something more significant, a pattern of journalists who covered the Hartford-Dominion connection subsequently leaving their positions at local papers, their bylines disappearing from publication, their careers shifting to unrelated fields or different geographic regions. The pattern suggested systematic pressure rather than coincidental career changes. Even more concerning, Senator Hartford now served on the Senate Banking Committee, his legislative influence extending to regulatory frameworks governing financial institutions and enforcement mechanisms for banking laws. His current policy positions consistently favored reduced oversight of exactly the types of transactions that had characterized Dominion Trust operations. The connections crystallized in Michael's mind, a politician whose early career benefited from questionable financial support, who now occupied a position allowing him to protect similar operations, whose rise to power coincided with Dominion's collapse and the systematic concealment of evidence that might implicate him in deeper involvement than publicly acknowledged. Friday morning brought preparation for Sarah's weekend visit and the planned dome exploration. Michael drove to Clyde's general store, now managed by his nephew, while Clyde remained hospitalized. The inventory provided most essentials: heavy-duty flashlights, extra batteries, rope, basic tools. Michael selected items that served legitimate purposes while meeting their specialized needs, maintaining the appearance of routine cabin maintenance. As he loaded supplies into Norris's truck, Michael noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its driver pretending to read a newspaper while maintaining peripheral awareness of the store entrance. The surveillance had become increasingly obvious, shifting from concealment to intimidation through visibility. They wanted Michael to know he was being watched, wanted that knowledge to discourage further investigation. The psychological tactic might have worked against someone without combat experience. But Michael had operated under constant observation in Afghanistan, had learned to function effectively despite knowing hostile eyes tracked his movements. The visible surveillance simply confirmed the significance of what lay beneath the dome, reinforcing his determination rather than undermining it. He drove directly from the store to Jessica's house, arriving precisely at the agreed pickup time for Sarah's weekend visit. The custody routine provided cover for necessary movement, allowing him to collect Sarah without triggering additional scrutiny. To outside observers, the weekend would appear normal, father and daughter following established visitation patterns. Sarah entered the truck with forced casualness, her backpack bulging with more than typical weekend necessities. Once they cleared town limits, her composed facade cracked slightly, revealing the strain of maintaining appearances while processing genuine threat. Someone followed Mom to the grocery store yesterday. Same men who were watching school. They're not even trying to hide anymore. The escalation matched Norris's prediction. Systematic identification of connections, expansion of surveillance to include family members, gradual increase in visibility to maximize psychological pressure. Michael reassured Sarah with calm confidence he didn't entirely feel. They're trying to scare us into backing off. That means we're close to something they can't afford to have exposed. As they approached Norris's house rather than the cabin, Michael explained the strategic adjustment. Changing locations disrupted expectations, complicated surveillance, created uncertainty among those tracking their movements. Sarah absorbed the tactical thinking with remarkable composure, her analytical mind processing implications with maturity beyond her 15 years. Norris welcomed Sarah with grandfatherly warmth that belied the seriousness of their situation. He had arranged his dining room as an operations center, blueprints and satellite imagery covering the table, equipment inventoried in precise rows along one wall. The engineer's methodical approach seemed to reassure Sarah, transforming abstract threat into concrete problem requiring practical solution. They spent the afternoon reviewing Norris's detailed schematics of the dome interior, focusing particularly on the vault mechanisms. Sarah spread out her research findings, printouts from microfilm archives, notes on Hartford's early political career, patterns of journalistic disappearance following Dominion Trust coverage. The physical evidence created tangible connection between historical wrongdoing and current power structures, between buried secrets and active protection of those concealing them. Norris examined Sarah's findings with increasing agitation, recognizing names from his Helios Works days among those implicated in financial dealings with Hartford. The connections weren't coincidental. Some of the same executives who had commissioned the dome's construction later funded Hartford's early campaigns through channels designed to disguise origins, creating deliberate separation between source and recipient. As evening approached, Michael conducted thorough security check of Norris's property, establishing defensive positions and escape routes should they become necessary. The tactical preparation followed military protocols adapted for civilian situation, identifying choke points, calculating fields of fire, determining fallback positions if primary exits became compromised. The approach might seem excessive, but Michael's combat experience had taught him that thorough preparation for worst-case scenarios often prevented their occurrence through readiness rather than reaction. That night, they finalized tomorrow's plan for the dome exploration. The approach would utilize forest paths, minimizing exposure to potential surveillance, timing calculated to provide maximum daylight for investigation while avoiding peak observation hours typically employed by professional security operations. Equipment selection balanced necessity against mobility, prioritizing documentation tools and vault access implements over comfort or convenience items that might impede rapid movement if required. Sarah's role generated brief disagreement. Michael's protective instincts suggesting she remain with Jessica under invented pretext, Norris advocating for her analytical skills on site, Sarah herself insisting on participation with uncharacteristic forcefulness. The conflict resolved when Sarah presented logical argument that truly compelling her to stay behind would require explanation to Jessica that would inevitably draw her mother into danger through knowledge. The possibility of transferring threat to Jessica proved decisive, Michael reluctantly acknowledging that controlled risk with preparation outweighed uncontrolled exposure through misguided protection attempt. Before sleep, Sarah surprised both men by producing topographical maps she'd printed from geographic survey databases, overlaid with property boundaries and ownership records extending back to 1980. The research showed the dome's location had undergone systematic documentary erasure, originally registered to shell company called Echo Summit Holdings, later transferred to Dominion Trust subsidiary, eventually reclassified as federal forest land before disappearing entirely from official records around 2005. The deliberate concealment confirmed their suspicions about the facility's significance, not merely secure storage, but active suppression of its existence, resources dedicated to removing rather than merely disguising its presence. Such efforts required coordination across multiple agencies and jurisdictions, influence extending beyond normal corporate capacity into governmental function. The pattern suggested corruption rather than merely questionable business practices, conspiracy rather than simply financial impropriety. Morning arrived with unexpected weather advantage, steady rain reducing visibility and discouraging casual forest visitors, providing natural cover for their approach while complicating potential surveillance. They departed Norris's house separately, Michael and Sarah in Norris's truck, taking direct route toward legitimate hiking trail access point, Norris following 30 minutes later in borrowed vehicle taking circuitous path to secondary forest entry used primarily by local hunters. The approach created appearance of unrelated forest visitors while positioning all three at predetermined rendezvous coordinates with minimal observation probability. The forest crossing proved challenging under rainy conditions. Slick ground creating treacherous footing, rain-heavy branches reducing visibility, cold penetrating clothing designed for mobility rather than comfort. Sarah maintained pace with surprising endurance, her determination evident in focused expression and efficient movement. Norris struggled more visibly, his age and physical limitations apparent on difficult terrain, but his resolve never wavered despite obvious discomfort. They approached the dome clearing with tactical caution, Michael conducting perimeter reconnaissance before signaling all clear to Sarah and Norris. The structure appeared unchanged externally, its weathered panels still supporting moss and climbing vegetation, its doors still hanging at slight angle on corroded hinges. But subtle evidence indicated recent visitation. Footprints partially filled with rainwater, suggesting presence within past 24 hours, cigarette butts showing minimal environmental exposure, broken vegetation indicating movement by individuals unconcerned with concealing their presence. Sarah activated the rotation mechanism with practiced confidence, the dome turning precisely 15 degrees before locking into position to reveal the steel hatch they discovered on initial visit. The mechanical operation functioned smoothly, despite decades of exposure and recent precipitation, testament to engineering quality and ongoing maintenance that contradicted the structure's abandoned appearance. Using the crowbar, Michael applied leverage against the hatch's recessed handle, feeling initial resistance give way gradually as internal components aligned. When the handle finally shifted completely, the hatch opened with surprising ease, counterweighted design compensating for substantial mass. Cool air rushed upward from the revealed passage, carrying scent of contained environment, metallic, processed, distinctly different from surrounding forest atmosphere. The spiral staircase descended into darkness, metal treads disappearing beyond flashlight range after several rotations. Michael tested structural integrity before committing full weight, finding minimal deterioration despite decades of nominal disuse. The construction quality exceeded typical standards, components chosen for longevity rather than economy, maintenance evidently performed despite supposed abandonment. Michael descended first, tactical position placing him at point of greatest potential risk. Sarah following at specified distance, Norris remaining above as security observer and communication relay. The staircase terminated approximately 30 feet below surface level, opening into antechamber with metal panel walls and seamless concrete floor. A single doorway dominated the far wall, massive vault entrance with sophisticated locking mechanisms, an interface panel showing minimal power indicators. Sarah examined the security system with fascinated intensity, her research into historical banking technology providing context for understanding the components. The design represented late 1980s state-of-art, separate mechanical and electronic systems, creating redundant security, requiring multiple authorization methods. The approach produced exceptional protection, but introduced vulnerability through maintenance requirements, emergency override capabilities designed to prevent complete lockout if primary systems failed. Michael located the maintenance panel Norris had identified in his documentation, concealed beside primary interface beneath cosmetic covering. The bypass sequence required precise execution, specific rotational patterns of manual override dials, carefully timed pressure applications to retention pins, simultaneous manipulation of tertiary controls designed to prevent single operator access under normal circumstances. His military engineering training proved invaluable. The motions echoing specialized breaching techniques for secured installations in combat zones. The sequence completed successfully, internal mechanisms responding with series of metallic sounds as separate locking components disengaged sequentially. The progression continued for nearly 30 seconds, each click representing deactivation of distinct security element within complex arrangement designed to resist forced entry through isolated component manipulation. When final lock released, the vault door remained stationary, its massive weight requiring deliberate actuation rather than swinging open automatically. Michael and Sarah together applied steady pressure against recessed hand grip, counterweighting system gradually engaging to assist their effort. Initial movement measured barely inches, sealed environment creating vacuum resistance that broke suddenly with audible rush of equalizing pressure. As vault doors swung wider, their flashlight beams revealed contents exceeding even Norris's most significant predictions. Metal shelving along left wall contained stacked currency bundles, multiple national denominations, bound in wrappings bearing foreign bank stamps and classification markings. The amount represented millions minimum, potentially tens of millions, depending on specific denominations and current exchange rates. But financial cash appeared secondary to primary contents. Document storage cabinets arranged in precise rows throughout remaining floor space, labeled drawers suggesting meticulous organization system rather than hurried concealment. Each cabinet contained multiple compartments with classification markings, dates, and alphanumeric identifiers using system unfamiliar to standard financial documentation. Sarah approached nearest cabinet, opening top drawer with careful movements, minimizing disturbance of original arrangement. Inside, manila folders contained printed transaction records, correspondence copies, photographic documentation of meetings between individuals identified by initials or code designations. The dates span 1987 through 2002, covering Dominion Trust's operational period before its collapse the following year. The volume of documentation staggered Michael's assessment, hundreds of drawers potentially containing thousands of individual files, each representing financial transactions, political connections, evidence of activities deliberately concealed from regulatory oversight. Comprehensive review would require days rather than hours, thorough analysis weeks or months. Sarah focused immediately on cabinet marked Project Capstone, extracting folder labeled Hartford Allocation Protocols. Inside, transaction records documented systematic financial support, far exceeding publicly acknowledged campaign donations that Hartford had returned with appropriate indignation when connections became known. The support utilized multiple shell companies, offshore accounts, and intermediary entities to disguise origins and maintain plausible deniability for recipient. The records confirmed Sarah's research hypothesis. Hartford's relationship with Dominion Trust extended far beyond acknowledged donations, involving complex financial mechanisms designed specifically to conceal connection between source and recipient. More significantly, transactions continued long after public disavowal, shifting to increasingly sophisticated concealment methods rather than terminating as officially claimed. Michael photographed key documents while Sarah continued examining adjacent folders. The evidence connected current Senator Hartford to financial improprieties he had publicly denied, establishing pattern of deliberate deception rather than isolated error or misunderstanding. The political implications alone justified Apex Meridian's determination to prevent discovery, explaining escalating pattern of intimidation following Michael's initial dome discovery. As they documented Hartford files, Sarah made unexpected connection that expanded significance dramatically. She compared account numbers from vault records to database information she'd compiled from publicly available sources, identifying matched sequences between supposedly separate financial systems. The account numbers documented in Dominion Trust records aligned perfectly with entries in the Arkwell Registry, public database of frozen assets and outstanding legal judgments maintained by federal banking authorities. The correlation created traceable pathway from historical criminal activity to current financial holdings, from past wrongdoing to present vulnerability. Sarah explained significance with growing excitement. These Dominion accounts were supposedly closed during bankruptcy proceedings, assets seized and distributed to identified victims. But they are still active in the Arkwell system, still containing substantial balances, still tied to the original criminally derived funds. Someone manipulated the recovery process, maintained control of assets that should have been confiscated. The revelation clarified Apex Meridian's urgent interest in preventing discovery, not just protecting reputations or concealing historical wrongdoing, but maintaining access to financial resources that legally should have been surrendered years ago. The vault didn't just contain evidence of past crimes. It documented ongoing criminal activity connecting former Dominion executives to current political leadership through shared financial interests. As Michael and Sarah prepared to exit with photographic evidence and selected original documents, Ranger's distinctive warning bark echoed from above. 3 sharp sounds at measured intervals, the alert pattern Michael had trained him to use for approaching strangers. Norris's voice followed immediately, deliberately calm, but carrying unmistakable urgency. Company arriving. Black SUV on Forest Road. Multiple occupants. Suggest immediate exit strategy implementation. The tactical situation crystallized instantly in Michael's combat-trained assessment. They had perhaps minutes before Apex representatives reached the dome, seconds more before they discovered the open hatch and descended to the vault. The confined space created immediate disadvantage, limited maneuverability, restricted escape options. Michael directed Sarah to gather essential documentation while he secured their exit route, mentally calculating timing and movement requirements. The spiral staircase presented obvious choke point, defendable from above, but equally limiting for those attempting to ascend under pressure. Better to reach surface level before confrontation. Maintain mobility advantage rather than fixed position. They ascended rapidly, Sarah carrying selected files documenting Hartford connections and Arkwell registry correlations, Michael following to secure rear position. Rangers' continued alertness at perimeter indicated approaching threat had not yet reached clearing, but advanced steadily closer. Norris waited at hatch entrance, tension evident in rigid posture and tightly controlled expression. He gestured toward tree line with subtle head movement. 2 men approaching from access road, armed, though weapons not currently displayed. Professional movement patterns, Lang among them, directing rather than participating directly. The observation confirmed Michael's tactical prediction. Apex had escalated to direct intervention rather than continued surveillance, bringing operational personnel rather than relying on observation alone. The timing suggested response to detected activity rather than scheduled inspection, perhaps triggered by sensors they hadn't identified or informants monitoring their movement from Norris's property. Michael quickly outlined extraction plan, utilize eastern forest boundary where vegetation provided maximum concealment, maintain perpendicular movement from likely pursuit vector, reach alternate extraction point where Norris's neighbor waited with vehicle as prearranged contingency. The planning reflected military extraction protocols adapted for civilian application, maximizing available resources while acknowledging limitations imposed by non-combatant participants. As they prepared to implement withdrawal, Sarah suddenly reversed direction, returning to the hatch with determined expression. Before Michael could intercept, she had descended 3 steps, reaching to heavy lever position inside hatch rim, the manual release for dome rotation mechanism, identified in Norris's blueprints, but not previously utilized. She pulled the lever with surprising strength, triggering mechanical sequence that began rotating dome in reverse direction from their entry activation. The movement would realign structure to original position, concealing hatch location beneath soil and vegetation, creating significant delay for pursuers attempting to follow their underground path. The strategic insight impressed Michael even as parental concern registered Sarah's unnecessary risk exposure. His daughter had identified tactical advantage he'd overlooked, implementing solution that might provide crucial additional minutes for their extraction. The action demonstrated instinctive operational thinking that matched his own combat-developed awareness. They moved through forest with coordinated efficiency, Ranger leading to identify optimal path through dense vegetation, Michael establishing pace sustainable for both Sarah and Norris despite significant age and conditioning differences. The engineers struggled visibly on difficult terrain, but maintained forward progress through determination that transcended physical limitation, refusing to become liability despite mounting fatigue. Behind them, voices carried through rain-dampened forest, sharp commands, professional communication patterns, movement sounds indicating organized search rather than random pursuit. Apex personnel had discovered the rotating dome mechanism, but apparently not yet determined which direction their quarry had taken from the clearing. The time advantage proved sufficient to reach extraction point undetected. Small logging access road where Norris's neighbor waited with mud-spattered pickup truck. The arrangement represented final contingency planning, insurance against vehicular disablement or route compromise. Michael had established the backup extraction with veterans understanding that primary plans rarely survive contact with opposition, that operational success often depended on secondary options implemented under pressure. As they drove toward Millbrook on unmarked forest roads, Sarah examined documents secured from vault, organizing photographic evidence on her phone while correlating physical records with research findings. The technical focus kept her engaged productively, rather than dwelling on danger narrowly avoided, practical task displacing psychological stress through purposeful activity. Norris directed their driver through elaborate route designed to identify potential surveillance, incorporating direction changes, speed variations, temporary stops at locations providing observation advantages. The precautions revealed no immediate pursuit, suggesting Apex personnel focused on dome site investigation rather than wider search parameters. The temporary tactical advantage provided breathing space but not resolution. They had secured evidence documenting connection between Dominion Trust criminal activities and Senator Hartford's political rise, establishing correlation between supposedly seized accounts and currently active holdings in Arkwell Registry. But possession of evidence created immediate vulnerability. They became priority targets for Apex resources, legitimate threat to powerful interests with substantial capacity for counteraction. As they approached Norris's house, Michael observed black sedan parked conspicuously in neighboring driveway, identical to vehicle previously identified conducting surveillance, positioned for optimal observation of property entrance. The presence confirmed his tactical assessment. Apex maintained multiple operational elements, deployed assets to anticipated extraction points, while simultaneously investigating dome disturbance. Norris immediately recognized implication, directing driver to continue past house without slowing, maintaining casual driving pattern to avoid triggering pursuit activation. The engineer's strategic thinking emerged with unexpected clarity. They know about me now, about my connection to both of you. My house isn't safe. None of our known locations remain viable. The observation matched Michael's combat experience. Compromise of one position generally indicated broader operational security failure, necessity for complete displacement rather than incremental adjustment. They needed location unknown to opponents, communication methods outside established patterns, resources not traceable through existing records. Sarah interrupted strategic discussion with sudden revelation, waving her phone with uncharacteristic animation. I found him, Frank Wilson, the FBI agent who investigated Dominion Trust. He's living under slightly altered name in Cascade Falls, working as private investigator focusing on financial fraud cases. His company website mentions specialization in cases involving banking institutions and regulatory failures. The connection provided potential sanctuary and expert assistance simultaneously, assuming Wilson's apparent continued interest in Dominion Trust reflected genuine commitment rather than elaborate counterintelligence operation. The risk remained substantial, but preferable to continued movement without destination or extended exposure without specialized protection. They developed approach plan while continuing movement on secondary roads, maintaining distance from known surveillance locations, while establishing communication security protocols. Sarah would contact Wilson through his business website, using information from vault documents as authentication method, requesting urgent meeting regarding Dominion Trust evidence without providing specific current location or movement details. The message composition required careful balance, sufficient specificity to establish credibility, limited information to maintain operational security, implicit acknowledgement of shared interest without naive assumption of automatic alliance. Michael reviewed the text before transmission, recognizing his daughter's natural aptitude for intelligence communication despite complete lack of formal training. Wilson's response arrived within 30 minutes, brief acknowledgement without explicit confirmation, meeting location specified using geographical coordinates rather than street address, timing defined through reference to sunset rather than specific hour. The communication method itself demonstrated security as awareness, suggesting professional caution rather than enthusiastic cooperation. They reached designated meeting points shortly after sunset, abandoned ranger stations serving National Forest area reduced by budget cuts 5 years previously. The location provided both isolation and legitimate explanation for presence if questioned by law enforcement, combining tactical advantages with plausible civilian justification for occupancy. Frank Wilson waited inside darkened building, position selected for optimal observation of approaching vehicles while minimizing his own visibility. Michael recognized fellow veteran immediately, the controlled stillness, the environmental awareness, the deliberately neutral expression masking continuous threat assessment. Wilson's FBI background showed in his positioning, his observation patterns, his communication security despite apparent retirement from official duties. Wilson examined vault documents with methodical precision, comparing specific details to information contained in battered leather portfolio he'd brought to meeting. The correlation proved definitive: account numbers, transaction dates, participant identifiers matching across independent sources, establishing authenticity through multiple verification methods. His expression remained professionally impassive despite documented confirmation of investigation conclusions he'd apparently reached years earlier, but failed to establish through official channels. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight of personal vindication balanced against professional frustration. They shut down my investigation 3 months before completion, claimed jurisdictional conflict with the other agencies, reassigned key personnel, restricted access to primary evidence, effectively dismantled case framework we'd spent 2 years building. The conversation continued into night, Wilson providing historical context while Michael, Sarah, and Norris contributed current intelligence, technological details, tactical assessment. The combined information created comprehensive operational picture: Dominion Trust's systematic criminal activities, Hartford's emergence through financial support from those operations, Apex Meridian's current function preserving both existing assets and political protection, ensuring continued freedom of action. Most significantly, Wilson confirmed Sarah's Arkwell registry connection, providing insider perspective on its implications. Those accounts should have been frozen, contents distributed to identified victims, or transferred to government holdings if victims couldn't be located. Their continued activity represents ongoing criminal enterprise rather than historical wrongdoing, active fraud rather than residual evidence. The revelation transformed their situation from historical discovery to contemporary criminal investigation, from exposing past misconduct to interrupting current operations. The distinction carried profound implications for both threat assessment and response planning. Apex Meridian protected not just reputations and political careers, but ongoing criminal financial operations generating substantial current revenue. As midnight approached, Wilson offered unexpected alliance, not merely temporary sanctuary, but active operational support utilizing his investigation experience, professional contacts, and evidence accumulated during official inquiry, but never formally processed through justice system. The partnership created immediate strategic advantage through expanded resource access, specialized knowledge, established intelligence collection methods. Michael recognized pivotal decision point: continue independent movement with limited resources and capabilities, or integrate with Wilson's established operation, accepting associated command structure implications and operational constraints. The choice balanced autonomy against effectiveness, control against capability, personal responsibility against collective strength. The calculus resolved clearly when Sarah presented her perspective with characteristic directness. We found physical evidence proving what he's worked years to establish. He has infrastructure and experience we need. Either we work together or we waste both advantages. The simple assessment cut through tactical complexity to strategic clarity, identifying optimal path forward with uncomplicated precision. Michael acknowledged his daughter's judgment with newfound respect, recognizing emerging leadership capacity alongside previously demonstrated analytical abilities. As they finalized initial cooperative framework, Wilson received alert through monitoring system established on property perimeter, vehicle approaching on access road, lights extinguished, movement pattern indicating deliberate concealment rather than legitimate approach. The timing precluded coincidence, suggesting either tracking mechanism they hadn't identified or information source connected to their meeting arrangements. Wilson immediately activated contingency protocols, directing movement to reinforce storage room previously prepared for emergency sheltering. The facility reflected professional security planning, multiple exit options, communication capabilities independent of commercial networks, defensive positions covering all potential entry points. Through observation slots cut in wooden wall panels, they watched black SUV enter clearing surrounding ranger station, its occupants deploying with practiced coordination that confirmed Michael's assessment of professional security personnel rather than conventional law enforcement. The team established perimeter positions with tactical efficiency, weapons visible, but maintained at ready posture rather than aggressive deployment. Victor Lang emerged from vehicle last, his tailored appearance incongruous against tactical operators surrounding him. He approached ranger station entrance with confident strides suggesting certainty of occupancy despite absence of visible confirmation. His expression showed neither anger nor urgency, simply focused determination toward objective identification and task completion. Wilson activated concealed recording system, documenting Lang's unauthorized entry and weapons presence, while simultaneously capturing any statements that might establish intent or operational parameters. The professional investigator's methodology demonstrated law enforcement orientation despite private sector status, evidence collection continuing automatically alongside defensive positioning. As Lang's team prepared for building entry, Ranger suddenly tensed beside Michael, ears flattening against skull while low growl vibrated through powerful chest. The German Shepherd's reaction preceded audible trigger by crucial seconds, providing advance warning before approaching vehicle engine sound reached human hearing threshold. Multiple headlights swept clearing as Sheriff Davis arrived with 3 patrol vehicles, deputies deploying with weapons drawn and commands delivered through vehicle loudspeakers. The law enforcement response created immediate tactical disruption for Lang's team, forcing weapons concealment and operational recalibration as legitimate authority established perimeter control. Davis approached Lang directly, stance and movement communicating confidence of position rather than uncertainty of confrontation. Got reports of trespassers with weapons at county property. Care to explain why private security is conducting operations without notification or authorization? The sheriff's intervention created unexpected advantage. Official presence interrupting apex operation, legitimate authority constraining immediate threat, documentary evidence being captured through patrol vehicle cameras. The development didn't eliminate danger, but transformed its immediate manifestation, shifting from direct physical threat to complex jurisdictional interaction. Wilson directed them towards secondary exit while law enforcement engagement continued outside, utilizing ranger station design features to enable unobserved departure through maintenance access connecting to Forest Service Road beyond clearing perimeter. The extraction proceeded without opposition, Lang's team fully occupied with explaining their presence to increasingly skeptical sheriff, whose questions demonstrated awareness of broader context beyond simple trespassing incident. They reached Wilson's vehicle parked at predetermined alternate position, departing area without pursuit as Davis continued detention processing for Lang's team, pending verification of claim security credentials and property access authorization. The temporary advantage provided breathing space for strategic reorganization, evidence assessment, counteraction planning with the expanded resource access through Wilson's established operation. The former FBI agent drove with practiced efficiency, route selection demonstrating both area familiarity and counter-surveillance awareness. His safehouse location remained undisclosed until arrival, converted hunting lodge outside Cascade Falls, its isolated position providing both security advantage and operational concealment, while established surveillance systems monitored approach routes in surrounding terrain. Inside, the facility revealed Wilson's professional background despite civilian appearance, communications equipment with encryption capabilities, document processing station with forensic authentication tools, security monitors covering comprehensive perimeter control. The operation reflected years of systematic preparation rather than reactive response, infrastructure development based on anticipation of eventual opportunity rather than spontaneous necessity. As Sarah organized vault documents for systematic analysis, Wilson outlined operational history that explained his preparedness. 5 years investigating Dominion Trust officially, 7 more privately after forced retirement. The work had consumed personal resources, professional reputation, family relationships, cost measured in decades of single-minded focus, sustained through conviction that accountability eventually required only evidence and opportunity aligning simultaneously. The vault documents provided precisely that alignment, physical evidence supporting conclusions Wilson had reached years earlier but failed to establish through compromised official channels. Combined with Sarah's Arkwell registry correlation, the material created comprehensive case file connecting historical crimes to current operations, establishing continuity between past wrongdoing and present vulnerability. Michael recognized watershed moment through military operational assessment, transition from defensive movement to offensive planning, from evasion to engagement, from victims to investigators. The strategic shift fundamentally altered their relationship with Apex Meridian, transforming from targets of intimidation to existential threat against operations maintained through decades of systematic concealment. Wilson confirmed this analysis with professional detachment that belied personal investment. They'll recognize the paradigm shift once they realize what you recovered from the vault. Intimidation tactics will accelerate to elimination protocols, not just pressure, but permanent resolution. We have perhaps 48 hours before they identify this location and deploy appropriate resources. The timeline established operational parameters, evidence processing requirements, distribution planning, strategic release methodology, to ensure information survival regardless of personal security compromises. Wilson's experience provided implementation framework. Michael's tactical training contributed security protocols. Norris's technical knowledge enabled documentation authentication. Sarah's research skills facilitated contextual analysis connecting historical evidence to contemporary significance. As they worked through night establishing comprehensive response plan, Michael observed his daughter with mixture of pride and concern, her capabilities emerging through crisis, her maturity accelerating through necessity, her courage manifesting through deliberate choice rather than emotional reaction. The development simultaneously impressed and terrified him, parental protection instincts warring with recognition of emerging adult capacity. Sarah seemed to sense his conflicted assessment, pausing her document organization to address unspoken concern. I know you're worried about me being involved in this, but I'm already involved whether I'm here or somewhere else. At least here, I'm helping instead of just waiting to be found. The simple statement encapsulated essential truth. Michael had recognized in combat but struggled applying to family context. Security came through effective action rather than passive protection, through confronting threats rather than avoiding them, through controlled engagement rather than indefinite evasion. His daughter had reached this understanding intuitively, applying analytical clarity to personal circumstance with remarkable effectiveness. Wilson interrupted their moment with urgent update. Sheriff Davis had contacted him through secure channel established during previous professional interaction, reporting Lang's release following intervention by congressional office claiming national security interest. The development confirmed Hartford's direct involvement, establishing connection between Senator's office in Apex Meridian's field operations beyond circumstantial evidence or historical documentation. Davis had provided final warning before terminating communication. They're activating everything they have. Multiple vehicles moving toward Ravenwood. Electronic surveillance authorization requested through federal channels. This goes higher than I can manage alone. The sheriff's information accelerated their timeline dramatically. Operational compromise now measured in hours rather than days. Opposition resources deploying at maximum capacity. Legitimate authority being leveraged to enable extra-legal activities under national security justification. The advantage temporarily gained through Davis's intervention had shifted back to Apex, their institutional connections providing capability for rapid recovery and enhanced response. Wilson immediately initiated contingency protocols, evidence duplication across multiple formats, distribution through secure channels to pre-established contacts in media and law enforcement, activation of dead man switches, ensuring information release if monitoring patterns indicated team compromise or communication cessation. The preparations reflected professional understanding that physical security might fail while information integrity could nonetheless survive through proper advance arrangement. By dawn, they had implemented separation protocol developed through Wilson's years of contingency planning, different team members carrying distinct evidence components, traveling through separate routes toward independent safe locations, maintaining communication blackout except during predetermined windows using encrypted channels. The approach maximized opposition resource requirements while minimizing individual targeting profile, creating operational complexity beyond Apex Meridian's anticipated response capacity. Michael and Sarah would travel together toward Western Distribution Point, carrying primary Hartford documentation and Arkwell registry correlation evidence. Wilson would move south with historical Dominion Trust materials establishing criminal enterprise foundation. Norris would travel east with technical documentation authenticating vault construction and access methodology. The dispersal created information redundancy while preventing single-point vulnerability. No individual capture could compromise entire operation. No location breach could recover complete documentation set. The approach reflected military principle of distributed command nodes, ensuring mission continuation despite leadership targeting or communication disruption. 3 hours into implementation, Wilson's surveillance network detected coordinated vehicle movement towards safe house location, multiple SUVs approaching from different directions, deployment pattern indicating professional tactical operation rather than coincidental convergence. The response force had located them significantly faster than an anticipated timeline, suggesting intelligence source they hadn't identified or tracking capability exceeding their countermeasures. Immediate extraction became operational priority, departure routes selected based on real-time surveillance data showing approach vectors and deployment patterns. Michael and Sarah would exit through Northern Forest Trail, utilizing natural cover to reach secondary vehicle positioned specifically for emergency evacuation. Wilson would create deliberate distraction at southern perimeter, drawing attention while other team members executed primary exfiltration. The plan required precise timing and communication coordination, a challenge under operational pressure, but achievable through combined experience of former military engineer and FBI investigator. Norris would remain inside facility monitoring surveillance feeds and providing positional updates through encrypted communication channel, leveraging his technical expertise to maximum advantage despite physical limitations preventing active field participation. As they finalized immediate action plan, Wilson received unexpected intelligence through secure data channel, detailed profile of opposition force approaching their location, including personnel identification, equipment inventory, communication frequencies. The information arrived without source attribution, but contained authentication markers indicating connection to Sheriff Davis, suggesting unofficial assistance continuing despite official disengagement following Lang's politically enabled release. The intelligence provided crucial tactical advantage, specific knowledge of opposition capabilities, enabling targeted countermeasures rather than generalized resistance. Michael immediately integrated new information into extraction planning, adjusting route selection and timing based on documented deployment patterns of approaching security team. Sarah demonstrated remarkable composure during accelerated preparation, organizing essential documentation with methodical efficiency while maintaining situational awareness that veterans twice her age sometimes fail developing. She prioritized evidence preservation over personal comfort, digital redundancy over material possession, mission completion over individual security. Choices reflecting operational maturity rather than adolescent impulsiveness. When extraction movement began, Sarah matched Michael's pace through difficult forest terrain, maintaining noise discipline and movement security without requiring instruction or correction. Her adaptation to tactical necessity impressed even Wilson, whose professional experience included training novice agents under pressure situations. The development simultaneously encouraged and concerned Michael, his daughter displaying capabilities that would serve her well under current circumstances, but reflecting premature exposure to situations no 15-year-old should experience. They reached extraction vehicle without opposition, Wilson's distraction tactics apparently successful, drawing primary attention towards southern approach, while they utilized northern exfiltration route. The temporary advantage would dissipate quickly once opposition force realized primary targets had departed location. Their superior vehicular resources enabling rapid pursuit once directional clarity established. Michael drove with combat-trained precision, road selection balancing speed against concealment, direct movement against unpredictability. The approach utilized terrain features for visual cover, minimized exposure on major roadways, incorporated direction changes preventing effective triangulation through fixed observation points. The methodology reflected counter-pursuit training from military deployment, adapted for civilian environment, but maintaining core principles of evasion against superior resources. 2 hours into movement, they reached intermediate waypoint, small commercial airport serving regional traffic, specifically selected for particular operational characteristics. The facility featured minimal security presence, multiple access points, regular departures to destinations, including Wilson's designated distribution location. Most importantly, it provided an environment where father and teenage daughter traveling together appeared entirely unremarkable, blending into normal civilian patterns rather than standing out as potential targets. Their flight departed without incident, commercial airliner creating temporary sanctuary through mundane normalcy. The environment produced surreal juxtaposition, passengers concerned with legroom and beverage service, while Michael and Sarah carried evidence that could collapse political careers and trigger federal investigations, ordinary travel experience surrounding extraordinary circumstances without visible indication of disparity. Sarah utilized flight time for continued evidence processing, organizing digital documentation on encrypted storage device, while correlating physical records with research findings. The technical focus maintained operational momentum while providing psychological buffer against situations inherent stress, productive activity, displacing anxiety through purposeful engagement. Michael contacted Wilson through secure communication protocol once airborne, confirming successful extraction and movement toward distribution point. The former FBI agent reported similar progress, his southern route apparently avoiding effective interception despite tactical disadvantage created through intentional distraction role. Norris had departed eastern route after maintaining surveillance coverage until opposition force breached facility perimeter. His movement subsequently unconfirmed but presumed proceeding according to established plan. They landed at Western Hub Airport without security incident, transit passengers among hundreds moving through terminal without particular attention. The anonymity of mass transportation provided effective concealment, individual movement disappearing within collective patterns, targeting complexity, increasing exponentially through population density and established flow mechanisms. Following predetermined protocol, they separated briefly during terminal navigation, Michael proceeding through main concourse, Sarah utilizing alternative pathway accessible to unaccompanied minors, reuniting at ground transportation access point after independent movement created tracking disruption. The approach increased pursuit difficulty through divided surveillance requirements, simultaneously testing opposition resources and operational flexibility. No evidence of surveillance materialized during airport departure, suggesting either successful evasion or more concerning possibility of targeting transfer to destination rather than continued movement tracking. The latter represented more sophisticated approach, allocating resources toward arrival interception rather than transit disruption, demonstrating operational patience and strategic assessment rather than tactical reactivity. They reached local transportation hub without incident, utilizing public system rather than dedicated vehicle to maintain anonymity through collective movement patterns. The approach sacrificed control for concealment, direct routing for targeting disruption, independence for immersion within civilian activity, flows resistant to individualized tracking without extensive resource deployment. Their destination represented Wilson's strategic planning. Media organization headquarters, housing investigative journalism division, with established reputation for political accountability, reporting, and corporate malfeasance exposure. The selection balanced operational security against information dissemination requirements, organizational credibility against institutional vulnerability, public visibility against manipulation potential. Rebecca Morrison met them in building lobby, senior investigative reporter whose professional history included financial crime exposure and political corruption documentation. Her reputation within journalism circles featured both methodical verification standards and publication courage against institutional pressure. Qualities essential for current operational requirements, where evidence credibility would face immediate challenge from powerful interests with substantial resources. Morrison examined vault documentation with professional detachment that belied materials' explosive potential, methodically cross-referencing account numbers, transaction dates, authorization signatures, while maintaining continuous notes, capturing verification methodology alongside factual confirmation. The process demonstrated journalistic integrity that Wilson had apparently assessed during selection process. Information handling, reflecting both accuracy priority and manipulation resistance. Most significantly, Morrison recognized names among documented transactions that connected historical Dominion Trust operations to current political figures beyond Senator Hartford, regulatory officials overseeing banking systems, judiciary members handling financial crime cases, intelligence community leadership with classification authority over economic security matters. The network extended further than even Wilson's investigation had established, implicating institutional structures rather than merely individual actors. The comprehensive nature of documentation created both opportunity and vulnerability, evidence strength enabling accountability mechanisms while simultaneously threatening power structures with capacity for significant counteraction. The dynamic required carefully structured release methodology, information sequencing designed to establish public recognition before suppression capability could effectively engage. Morrison outlined publication strategy reflecting these considerations. Initial focused release, establishing Hartford connection through documented financial transactions. Subsequent expansion revealing broader network through progressive disclosure. Institutional protection through simultaneous distribution across multiple media organizations, preventing single-point suppression effectiveness. The approach leveraged journalistic methodology for evidentiary credibility while incorporating security awareness preventing opposition, preemption. 3 hours into documentation verification, Morrison received communication from colleague monitoring police frequencies. Multiple law enforcement units mobilizing toward media building following reported security incident. The development indicated opposition forces had successfully tracked their movement despite counter-surveillance measures, utilizing institutional connections to generate response through legitimate channels rather than deploying private resources in potentially visible operation. Morrison immediately activated organizational contingency protocol, documentation secured in building vault designed for classified material protection, digital copies transferred through secure network to partner organizations implementing parallel publication preparation, physical movement diverted through alternative exit routes, avoiding main access points under potential surveillance. The reporter's operational security awareness has impressed Michael. Her professional capabilities extending beyond journalistic methodology into practical fieldcraft suggesting either training or experience beyond typical media preparation. The capacity proved immediately valuable as she guided them through service corridors toward loading dock area, providing unmonitored exit while regular employees utilized standard departure routes, creating movement pattern complexity that complicated tracking efforts. They reached secondary vehicle without security engagement, Morrison driving with unexpected proficiency through delivery routes, specifically selected for minimal surveillance coverage and maximum navigation complexity. The temporary escape created breathing space for strategic reassessment, opposition response evaluation, operational adjustment based on demonstrated tracking capabilities exceeding anticipated countermeasures. Morrison directed vehicle toward predetermined alternate location. Small independent television station operating primarily local news programming, but maintaining network affiliation providing national distribution capability when required. The facility represented secondary publication vector, established specifically for contingency implementation, operational redundancy, ensuring mission continuation despite primary location compromise. The station news director, Morrison's former colleague from major network days, provided immediate access to broadcast infrastructure, digital authentication capabilities, secure communication channels connecting to partner organizations, implementing coordinated release strategy. The professional network demonstrated journalism's institutional strengths when properly engaged, individual relationships enabling collective response despite corporate consolidation and financial pressures that typically constrained investigative capacity. As technical preparations continued for information release, Michael monitored perimeter security through station surveillance system, identifying multiple unmarked vehicles, establishing coverage positions around facility with professional deployment patterns indicating coordinated operation rather than coincidental presence. The opposition response confirmed Wilson's prediction regarding escalation timeline, resource allocation shifting from intimidation to interdiction, from pressure to prevention. Sarah observed security development with analytical detachment that continued surprising Michael despite repeated demonstration of her capabilities throughout crisis progression. She identified vehicular distribution pattern, suggesting access control strategy rather than assault preparation, containment objective rather than extraction attempt. The assessment matched Michael's tactical evaluation, but emerged through intuitive analysis rather than formal training, natural pattern recognition rather than structured methodology. Morrison received secure communication from Wilson, confirming his successful arrival at Southern Distribution Point, national newspaper headquarters, where executive editor had provided immediate resources for documentation, verification, and publication preparation. The coordinated movement created redundant release capability across multiple media formats, geographical distribution, preventing effective suppression through localized pressure or resource concentration. Norris similarly reported Eastern arrival, technical documentation delivered to broadcast network, maintaining investigative division with specialized financial crime reporting on capability. The engineer's message included unexpected addition. Contact established with former Helios Works colleagues currently serving federal oversight agencies, technical verification providing institutional credibility, supplementing journalistic confirmation protocols. The distributed approach produced strength through decentralization, operational resilience through structural dispersion, strategic advantage through tactical flexibility. Individual components maintained independent capability while collectively creating comprehensive coverage, preventing effective opposition response through conventional suppression mechanisms requiring centralized target identification. Morrison initiated coordinated release sequence through encrypted communication channel connecting all distribution points, simultaneous publication triggering across print, broadcast, digital platforms, content standardization ensuring consistent evidentiary presentation, while format diversity created accessibility across demographic categories and consumption preferences. The approach reflected modern media environment understanding, information dissemination methodology, leveraging technological integration while maintaining traditional verification standards. Initial public response demonstrated explosive potential of vault documentation. Social media engagement metrics indicating unprecedented information sharing patterns. Traditional media organizations implementing breaking news protocols despite competitive positioning. Political journalists activating source networks for official response collection. The reaction validated Wilson's assessment regarding material significance, public interest immediately overriding typical attention fragmentation, characterizing contemporary information environment. Opposition response manifested through predictable channels, official statements denying documentation authenticity, legal representatives threatening defamation action, media surrogates questioning journalistic methodology. But conspicuously absent was the most effective countermeasure: alternative documentation contradicting vault evidence or providing innocent explanation for documented transactions. The omission suggested fundamental vulnerability within opposition position, reliance on process manipulation rather than factual refutation. Senator Hartford appeared on National Broadcast Network with prepared statement claiming political targeting, conspiracy implications, unspecified national security considerations, justifying classified activities beyond public disclosure parameters. The performance demonstrated professional communication training, but lacked substantive engagement with specific documentation contents, relying instead on procedural objection and character reference rather than evidentiary challenge. More concerning response emerged through unofficial channels, reports of warrant preparation targeting Wilson through creative legal interpretation of classified information handling regulations, surveillance authorization requests citing national security implications without specific threat identification, asset freezing actions against media organizations under financial crime investigation provisions normally requiring substantial judicial review before implementation. The institutional reaction revealed opposition's strategic approach, utilizing legitimate authority mechanisms for suppression purposes, leveraging procedural complexity against informational clarity, deploying bureaucratic resources to counter public transparency through administrative rather than factual confrontation. The methodology demonstrated sophisticated understanding of systemic vulnerabilities within accountability frameworks, exploitation of procedural tools for purposes contrary to their intended function. Michael recognized pattern from military experience, asymmetric response utilizing system components against institutional objectives, procedural weapons deployed when conventional suppression proved ineffective, administrative complexity exploited to prevent straightforward resolution through established mechanisms. The approach represented dangerous escalation beyond information control into systemic manipulation, threatening fundamental accountability structures rather than merely individual exposure consequences. Morrison identified similar concern from journalistic perspective, recognizing attack against institutional function rather than specific content. They're not just fighting this story, they're undermining the mechanisms that make any accountability possible. If they succeed, the precedent becomes more dangerous than the original crime. The assessment captured essential threat transcending immediate circumstances, systemic vulnerability rather than individual exposure, institutional degradation rather than specific accountability avoidance. The recognition transformed operational parameters from information dissemination to framework protection, from content delivery to system defense. Wilson communicated similar analysis through secure channel, reporting opposition efforts targeting distribution networks rather than content accuracy, institutional processes rather than evidential challenge. The approach confirmed coordinated strategy across opposition resources, deliberate selection of procedural battleground rather than factual engagement, systemic focus rather than content-specific response. The cumulative intelligence suggested strategic recalibration requirement, shifting from documentation release to institutional defense, from information provision to system protection, from exposure function to accountability preservation. The adjustment required operational flexibility without mission compromise, tactical adaptation while maintaining strategic objective. Morrison implemented modified approach reflecting these considerations: accelerated release timeline preventing procedural interruption, content distribution across jurisdictional boundaries, complicating legal suppression efforts, technical implementation, bypassing vulnerable institutional choke points susceptible to administrative manipulation. The methodology maintained journalistic standards while incorporating security and awareness that traditional media operations typically neglected through professional normalization within stable systems. As content distribution continued expanding across media ecosystem, opposition resources shifted toward more direct intervention, physical security presence increasing around distribution facilities, electronic interference attempting to disrupt communication channels, individual targeting through both legal mechanisms and personal intimidation. The escalation demonstrated growing desperation as conventional suppression proved ineffective against distributed approach. Institutional advantage insufficient against properly implemented transparency mechanisms. Most concerning development emerged through legitimate authority engagement, federal agencies mobilizing under national security justification, classification protocols implemented retroactively against already published material, judicial machinery activated through creative legal interpretation, transforming accountability journalism into potential criminal activity through definitional manipulation rather than substantive violation. The systemic response created immediate operational vulnerability, requiring countermeasure implementation. Physical location change, disrupting targeting parameters, communication, protocol adjustment, preventing monitoring effectiveness. Distribution, method modification, avoiding established interception mechanisms. The tactical adaptation represented military principle application in civilian context. Maintain momentum through position change. Preserve capability through methodology adjustment. Ensure mission continuation through procedural flexibility. Morrison coordinated movement to tertiary location. Small digital news operation functioning primarily through distributed contributor network rather than centralized facility. Technological infrastructure designed specifically for adversarial environment operation through lessons implemented from international reporting in restrictive information contexts. The organization demonstrated modern journalism adaptation to contemporary challenges, structural evolution reflecting operational reality rather than traditional institutional assumptions. The facility provided immediate advantages, minimal physical footprint, a reducing targeting profile, distributed technological architecture preventing single-point vulnerability, operational methodology incorporating security awareness through necessity rather than exceptional circumstance. The environment matched current requirements more effectively than traditional media operations designed for stable democratic systems rather than actively contested information spaces. Technical personnel implemented comprehensive security protocol, communication encryption exceeding commercial standards, distribution pathways utilizing multiple redundant channels, authentication methodology preventing content manipulation through verification chains resistant to conventional disruption. The infrastructure reflected contemporary understanding regarding information warfare characteristics, technological implementation addressing vulnerability patterns emerging through global experience rather than domestic assumption. Most significantly, the operation maintained continuous public information flow despite opposition efforts, documentation reaching increasingly broad audience through geometric distribution patterns, verification methods establishing credibility against official denial strategies, contextual analysis providing understanding framework beyond raw evidentiary presentation. The approach created self-reinforcing transparency mechanism resistant to conventional suppression through distributed architecture and public engagement characteristics. Sarah monitored response metrics with analytical precision, identifying engagement patterns demonstrating unprecedented information penetration across demographic categories, typically maintaining separate media consumption habits. The convergence indicated exceptional content impact, transcending normal distribution limitations, public interest overriding established information silos through perceived significance recognition rather than delivery mechanism optimization. Michael observed similar pattern from security perspective. Opposition resource allocation increasingly fragmented across multiple targets. Coordination complexity increasing through distributed response requirements. Effectiveness diminishing through focus dilution rather than capability reduction. The dynamic demonstrated fundamental advantage of decentralized operation against hierarchical opposition, network resilience against structured intervention, distributed strength against concentrated resources. Wilson reported parallel development through secure channel. Official response increasingly fragmented between agencies maintaining institutional credibility and political operatives prioritizing suppression. Professional integrity, creating internal resistance against manipulation attempts. Systemic antibodies activating against corruption. pathogens despite administrative pressure, and political leverage. The pattern demonstrated fundamental resilience within democratic institutions despite vulnerability exploitation attempts, inherent strength manifesting through individual professional commitment despite structural compromise. Most encouragingly, legitimate authority began asserting proper function through institutional corrective mechanisms, judicial review, questioning classification, justification without specific security threat identification, congressional oversight committees initiating independent verification processes, regulatory agencies implementing statutory requirements despite administrative pressure for selective enforcement. The response reflected systemic immune response activation, institutional defense mechanisms engaging against manipulation attempts rather than functioning as exploitation vectors. Rebecca Morrison captured essential dynamic with characteristic precision. Systems built to serve power will always face corruption attempts, but systems designed to serve truth have self-preservation instinct that transcends individual vulnerability. What looks like institutional failure is actually democratic immune system activating against infection. The assessment provided strategic framework transcending immediate tactical considerations, situational understanding incorporating systemic perspective beyond operational requirements, historical context beyond current circumstance, fundamental principle recognition beyond procedural implementation. The insight reflected professional wisdom, supplementing technical capability, philosophical, depth-enhancing, practical methodology. 3 days into continuous publication cycle, opposition strategy demonstrated significant recalibration, official narrative shifting from absolute denial toward contextual mitigation, legal approach moving from suppression attempt toward damage limitation, political response transitioning from complete rejection toward selective acknowledgement. The adjustment indicated recognition of suppression ineffectiveness, tactical retreat rather than strategic surrender, position modification seeking minimal concession rather than comprehensive accountability. Senator Hartford announced temporary committee position, recusal pending investigation completion, maintaining innocence assertion while acknowledging appearance concerns requiring procedural accommodation. The carefully crafted statement reflected professional crisis management implementation, positioning adjustment, seeking procedural advantage through apparent cooperation without substantive concession regarding documented transactions or established relationships. More substantively, federal regulators initiated formal examination of Arkwell registry accounts identified through vault documentation, freezing associated assets pending investigative completion, implementing statutory requirements despite political pressure for administrative delay. The action represented proper institutional function assertion, regulatory independence, demonstrating resilience against manipulation attempt, professional integrity, manifesting through procedural implementation despite influence efforts. Department of Justice officials announced preliminary inquiry regarding Apex Meridian Group activities, focusing specifically on potential violations related to banking regulations, securities compliance, financial disclosure requirements. The investigation represented appropriate institutional response despite limited scope avoiding broader political implications, procedural engagement, maintaining focus on statutory compliance rather than broader corruption patterns or systemic vulnerability exploitation. Most significantly, media organizations beyond initial distribution network began implementing independent verification processes, developing supplementary reporting, expanding documentation context, establishing additional connections between historical Dominion Trust operations and contemporary political structures. The expansion demonstrated institutional journalism functioning as intended, professional methodology applying appropriate standards while maintaining independence from manipulation attempts or intimidation efforts. The cumulative response indicated fundamental democratic resilience despite vulnerability exploitation, institutional strength despite structural compromise, systemic health despite targeted infection. The outcome validated Wilson's career-long persistence, Norris's decades-carrying burden, Michael and Sarah's risk acceptance, Morrison's professional courage, individual commitment collectively creating accountability, mechanism activation despite powerful opposition with substantial resources and significant leverage. 2 weeks after initial documentation release, Official investigations had expanded beyond preliminary inquiry into comprehensive examination. Federal prosecutors convening grand jury considering potential indictments, regulatory agencies implementing statutory enforcement actions against identified entities, congressional committees initiating formal hearings with subpoena authority and testimony requirements. The institutional engagement demonstrated proper function activation despite initial manipulation attempts. Democratic processes implementing designated purpose despite deliberate interference efforts. Victor Lang disappeared from public visibility following preliminary questioning by federal investigators, his absence noted through organizational documentation rather than physical confirmation. The development suggested either strategic withdrawal pending legal resolution or more concerning possibility of controlled disappearance, ensuring operational security through information containment. Either interpretation indicated fundamental disruption of apex meridian operational capability, organizational vulnerability, despite resource advantages and institutional connections. Most remarkably, the Dominion Trust Dome facility transitioned from concealed criminal evidence repository to documented historical artifact. Federal authorities establishing secure perimeter pending comprehensive investigation, architectural preservation experts assessing structural integrity for potential historical designation, media organizations reporting location details previously subjected to systematic concealment efforts. The transformation represented literal physical manifestation of metaphorical transparency achievement, secret installation becoming public knowledge through individual courage and institutional resilience. For Michael and Sarah, personal consequences manifested alongside public developments. Foreclosure proceedings against cabin property mysteriously discontinued without formal explanation. Banking records showing anonymous loan satisfaction, payment crediting account without identified source. Property title transferred to Michael's exclusive ownership through administrative process completed without standard procedural requirements. The outcome suggested either Wilson's invisible intervention, utilizing professional connections, or more intriguing possibility of conscience activation within financial institutions, recognizing moral obligation beyond legal requirement. More significantly, their relationship demonstrated fundamental transformation through shared experience. Previous distance replaced by mutual respect. Former communication barriers dissolved through collaborative problem solving. Past uncertainty regarding appropriate roles clarified through crisis-forged understanding. The development represented unexpected benefit transcending material considerations, relational restoration exceeding property preservation, emotional reconnection surpassing financial security. Jessica observed change with mixture of confusion and appreciation, unable to identify specific cause but recognizing positive outcome in Sarah's increased engagement and Michael's renewed confidence. The limited explanation they provided emphasized dome discovery while minimizing danger aspects, balancing informational honesty against unnecessary concern creation, acknowledging extraordinary experience without detailing specific risk elements, potentially triggering protective reaction, counterproductive to established outcome. Sarah returned to normal academic activities with transformed perspective, classroom learning contextualized through real-world application, theoretical concepts connected to practical implementation, educational engagement infused with purpose, derived from experience, demonstrating knowledge significance beyond abstract assessment. The development created educational advantage through motivation enhancement rather than content acquisition, engagement quality rather than information quantity, purpose recognition rather than procedural compliance. Michael received unexpected professional opportunity through connection established during crisis resolution, security consultation position with financial oversight, organization implementing enhanced protection protocols following regulatory examination, identifying systemic vulnerability. The role leveraged military engineering background while incorporating recent experience regarding non-conventional threat response, combining technical capability with strategic understanding, professional qualification with practical application knowledge. The position provided stability beyond immediate financial consideration, purpose alignment with personal values, capability utilization within meaningful context, contribution opportunity towards systemic improvement rather than merely individual advancement. The outcome represented appropriate resolution, balancing practical requirements against philosophical considerations, material needs against ethical framework, individual benefit against collective contribution. Norris experienced personal transformation through participation despite physical limitations and age constraints. Burden carried for decades finally transferred to appropriate institutional mechanisms. Responsibility maintained through ethical commitment, finally fulfilled through proper accountability channels. Professional compromise, finally resolved through systematic correction rather than individual absolution. The resolution provided psychological closure transcending legal considerations or professional requirements, moral reconciliation exceeding procedural completion. Wilson achieved career vindication through investigation resumption, professional judgment confirmed through institutional verification, personal sacrifice justified through systematic correction, individual persistence validated through collective response. The outcome represented appropriate completion of career-defining commitment, professional ethics maintained despite institutional failure, personal integrity preserved through adversity without corresponding bitterness or cynicism, despite legitimate justification. Most remarkably, Rebecca Morrison received journalism's highest professional recognition, National Award acknowledging exceptional public service through investigative reporting, demonstrating extraordinary courage against powerful opposition. The acknowledgement represented appropriate validation of professional commitment, transcending career advancement or personal recognition, institutional appreciation for individual courage, serving collective interest despite personal risk and professional challenge. 1 year following initial dome discovery, Michael stood on cabin porch watching sunrise illuminate forest clearing where property met wilderness boundary. The physical location remained unchanged despite surrounding circumstance transformation. Trees maintaining seasonal cycle, wildlife following established patterns, natural environment continuing rhythmic existence indifferent to human drama, temporarily occupying its space. Yet everything had fundamentally changed through individual choices creating collective consequence. Dome's secret exposed through curiosity, persistence, financial fraud uncovered through investigative courage, political corruption revealed through documentation preservation, systemic vulnerability addressed through institutional correction. The cumulative effect demonstrated democratic resilience despite deliberate subversion, accountability function despite powerful resistance, truth emergence despite systematic concealment. Sarah joined him on porch, college application materials in hand, seeking guidance regarding personal statement composition. The ordinary parental interaction carried extraordinary subtext. Educational opportunity discussion following life-threatening experience, future planning proceeding from historical exposure, normal developmental stage emerging from exceptional circumstance. The juxtaposition demonstrated remarkable human adaptability, psychological resilience, emotional capacity for integration between extraordinary challenge and ordinary progression. Their conversation reflected transformed relationship, mutual respect replacing hierarchical interaction, collaborative problem solving replacing directional guidance, reciprocal appreciation replacing traditional role fulfillment. The development represented unexpected benefit transcending material outcome or justice achievement, personal growth exceeding institutional correction, relational restoration surpassing accountability implementation. As discussion concluded, Sarah captured essential understanding with characteristic precision. Sometimes you have to break things open to fix what's broken inside. The dome wasn't just hiding old secrets, it was protecting the system that created them. We didn't just expose what happened, we stopped what was still happening. The simple statement encapsulated profound recognition regarding responsibility, extending beyond personal circumstance to systemic participation, courage requirement, transcending individual comfort to collective necessity, accountability, function, requiring active engagement rather than passive observation. The insight demonstrated wisdom beyond chronological expectation, understanding transcending educational provision, perspective exceeding typical developmental timeline. Michael recognized transformation extending beyond specific dome discovery to fundamental perspective shift, seeing beyond apparent reality to underlying truth, recognizing concealed connection beneath surface separation, understanding systematic pattern behind isolated incident. The development represented essential wisdom emerging through adversity rather than comfort, challenge rather than security, active engagement rather than passive acceptance. As sun cleared forest canopy, illuminating cabin clearing with morning possibility, Michael reflected on journey's unexpected nature. Foreclosure crisis becoming corruption exposure, personal financial threat transforming into systemic accountability opportunity, individual struggle evolving into collective correction mechanism. The progression demonstrated life's fundamental unpredictability, opportunity emerging through apparent disaster, purpose manifesting through seeming chaos. Most significantly, he recognized essential truth transcending specific circumstance, courage requirement within functioning democracy, individual responsibility within collective governance, active participation within institutional maintenance. The understanding provided framework extending beyond dome discovery or corruption exposure to fundamental citizenship requirements within self-governing society, ethical obligation transcending legal compliance, moral responsibility exceeding procedural adherence. Ranger joined them on porch. Alertness momentarily suspended through security recognition, protective instinct temporarily relaxed through threat absence assessment. The German Shepherd's behavior reflected environmental reality more accurately than human perception often acknowledged. Danger recognition without paranoia development, threat response without permanent hypervigilance, protection function without perpetual activation regardless of actual circumstance. The simple animal wisdom provided insight regarding post-crisis adjustment, appropriate vigilance without permanent alarm state, reasonable caution without paralyzing fear, prudent assessment without excessive reaction. The balance represented healthy adaptation rather than traumatic after effect, resilience manifestation rather than vulnerability indication, strength demonstration rather than damage evidence. As they moved inside to begin ordinary day following extraordinary journey, Michael carried transformed understanding regarding both personal responsibility and collective participation, individual courage enabling institutional function, personal risk creating public benefit, particular action generating systemic correction. The perspective provided framework transcending specific dome discovery to essential democratic maintenance requirement, citizenship obligation beyond legal compliance, moral responsibility, exceeding procedural adherence. The dome had contained buried secrets and concealed evidence, historical wrongdoing and contemporary corruption, individual misconduct and institutional failure. But its exposure had revealed something more significant than specific criminal activity or particular political corruption: the fundamental resilience within properly functioning democracy, self-correcting capacity within accountable governance, inherent strength within transparent systems despite deliberate subversion attempt or powerful opposition. That recognition represented the most valuable discovery emerging from forest clearing: understanding, transcending particular documents or specific evidence, wisdom exceeding individual case details or personal experience limitations, perspective encompassing fundamental democratic maintenance requirements rather than merely exposing particular corruption instance. Freedom required vigilance. Governance demanded participation. Democracy necessitated courage. The truth inside the dome had mattered less than the commitment to uncover it despite opposition, the evidence it contained less significant than the determination to expose it regardless of consequence, the specific corruption less important than the collective courage ensuring accountability despite powerful resistance.